The conductor's voice cut through the passenger car like a rusty blade. "Red Hollow, 15-minute stop." Eleanor Hart pressed her gloved hand against the window, her palm leaving a smudge on glass already filthy from 2 weeks of travel. Outside, the Arizona Territory sprawled in every direction, endless, hostile, and nothing like the green Illinois farmland she'd abandoned. The town wasn't much to look at. A single dirt street lined with weathered buildings, their paint peeling like sunburned skin. A saloon, a general store, a church with a crooked steeple that looked one strong wind away from collapse. And standing alone near the platform's edge, Samuel Pritchard, her future husband. Except the photograph he'd sent had lied, or maybe just been taken 20 years and 40 pounds ago. The man waiting below had thinning hair, a soft middle, and an expression that made Eleanor's chest tighten with something she refused to call fear. "You getting off, miss?" The conductor hovered beside her seat, already reaching for her battered trunk. "Yes." Her voice came out steady. That was something, at least. "Yes, I'm getting off." The heat hit her first, dry and vicious, nothing like Chicago's humid summers. It sucked the moisture from her throat in seconds. Then came the smell. Horses, dust, and something else she couldn't identify. Desperation, maybe. Or just the particular stench of a town clinging to existence in the middle of nowhere. Samuel Pritchard didn't move toward her. He stood with his shoulders hunched, one hand shoved in his pocket, the other clutching that piece of paper. Eleanor's traveling dress, her best one, navy with white piping that her sister had helped her press before she left, felt suddenly ridiculous. Too formal. Too hopeful. She forced herself down the platform steps, her legs stiff from days of sitting. 3 other passengers disembarked behind her, but they had the easy movements of people who knew where they were going, where they belonged. "Mr. Pritchard?" She stopped 6 feet away, maintaining a proper distance, even though everything in her wanted to close the gap, to make this real before it could slip away. "I'm Eleanor Hart. I know who you are." His voice was flat. Not mean, exactly, just absent, like he was reading lines someone else had written. "Got your letters?" Eleanor swallowed. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult to arrange. I tried to choose the most economical route, just as you suggested in your correspondence." "About that." He finally looked at her directly, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not anger, not disappointment, just a kind of exhausted resignation. "I need to give you this." He thrust the paper toward her. Eleanor took it on instinct, her fingers trembling despite her best efforts. The handwriting was cramped, rushed. "Miss Hart, I regret to inform you that circumstances have changed since our last correspondence. My situation has altered considerably, and I find myself unable to honor our agreement. A return ticket has been arranged for you on tomorrow's eastbound train. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. S. Pritchard." The words blurred. Eleanor read them twice, then a third time, as if repetition might change their meaning. "I don't understand." She looked up. "I came all this way. We had an agreement." "I know that." Pritchard shifted his weight, glancing past her shoulder. "But things changed." "What things?" "Just things." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead. "You'll be on the train tomorrow. The ticket's paid for. You can stay at the boarding house tonight. I've arranged that too." "You've arranged?" Eleanor heard her own voice rising and forced it back down. Ladies didn't make scenes. Mother had taught her that, at least, before the consumption took her. "You summoned me across the entire country, and now you've arranged for me to leave?" "I never summoned you." For the first time, something sharp entered Pritchard's tone. "You answered my advertisement. That's different. I spent everything I had on this journey." The words came out before Eleanor could stop them. "I sold my mother's jewelry. I left my sister alone in Chicago. That ain't my problem." Pritchard's face hardened. "I didn't make you come here. You chose that yourself." Around them, the platform had gone quiet. Eleanor became aware of eyes on her. The station master pretending to check his pocket watch. 2 women in faded calico dresses standing near the general store. A group of men outside the saloon who'd stopped their conversation to watch the show. They'd all been waiting for this. Waiting to see what the mail-order bride would do when she realized she wasn't wanted. "Is there someone else?" Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she intended. Did you change your mind because does it matter? Pritchard was already backing away. Train's at 9 tomorrow morning. Don't miss it. He turned and walked off, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step. He didn't look back. Within 30 seconds, he disappeared around the corner past the general store, and Eleanor stood alone on the platform with her trunk at her feet and a rejection letter crumpling in her grip. The train conductor cleared his throat. Miss, you'll need to move your trunk. We're pulling out in 10 minutes. Eleanor stared at him. Of course, my apologies. She bent to grab the trunk's handle, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. They shook too badly. She'd traveled 2,000 miles. She'd left everything, the tiny apartment she'd shared with her sister, the sewing work that barely kept them fed, the grave where their mother rested in a cemetery that was slowly being swallowed by the expanding city. And for what? To be handed a letter and dismissed like a servant who'd shown up on the wrong day? I can help with that. A new voice, male, but different from Pritchard's whining tone. This one had gravel in it. Use. Eleanor straightened and found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from the same hard rock as the surrounding territory. Tall, with shoulders that strained against a faded work shirt. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see a jaw that looked like it had forgotten how to smile and eyes that probably saw too much. I can manage, thank you. Eleanor reached for the trunk again. The stranger didn't move. You're the bride Pritchard ordered. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. I was supposed to be. Apparently he changed his mind. Appears so. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. Eleanor had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed like livestock at auction. You got somewhere to go tonight? The boarding house, evidently. Mr. Pritchard has generously arranged accommodations. She couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. Mrs. Chen's place. It's decent enough. He paused. I'm Cade Mercer. The name meant nothing to Eleanor, but she saw something flicker across the watching crowd. One of the women near the general store whispered something to her companion, and the men outside the saloon had gone very still. Whoever Cade Mercer was, people knew him, and they weren't entirely comfortable with his presence. Eleanor Hart. She gave a small nod, the only greeting propriety allowed. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Mercer, but I can find my way. Wasn't concerned, just making conversation. But he still didn't move, and his gaze remained fixed on her with an intensity that made Eleanor's skin prickle. You planning to take that train tomorrow? I don't see what other choice I have. There's always choices. Mercer's voice dropped lower, and Eleanor had to strain to hear him over the noise of the train preparing to depart. Question is whether you're brave enough to make them. Before Eleanor could respond, he touched the brim of his hat and walked away, his long stride eating up the platform boards. She watched him go, confusion mixing with the humiliation that still burned in her chest. The station master approached, more hesitant now. Miss Hart, Mrs. Chen's boarding house is just down the street. I can have someone carry your trunk. That won't be necessary. Eleanor grabbed the handle with both hands. The trunk was heavy, packed with everything she owned, but she'd carried it onto the train in Chicago, and she could carry it now. She wouldn't give these people one more thing to whisper about. The walk to the boarding house took less than 5 minutes, but felt like an hour. Every step, Eleanor felt eyes tracking her movement. The two women, the men at the saloon, a shopkeeper sweeping his front step, even a small boy playing with a wooden horse in the dirt stopped to stare. This was what her life had become. A spectacle. A cautionary tale mothers would tell their daughters about the dangers of desperation and poor choices. Mrs. Chen's boarding house sat at the far end of the street, a narrow 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left. A hand-painted sign hung above the door. Rooms. Clean. Respectable. The last word was underlined twice. Eleanor climbed the porch steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a petite Chinese woman in a crisp white apron. She looked Eleanor up and down with dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. You're the girl Pritchard didn't want. Not a question. Eleanor was getting tired of statements about her situation. I'm Eleanor Hart. I believe Mr. Pritchard arranged 1 night paid in advance. Room at the top of the stairs, second door. Mrs. Chen held out her hand. No men, no drinking, no noise after 9 o'clock. Of course. Eleanor shifted the trunk, trying to fish out money for a tip. Already paid. Mrs. Chen stepped back, allowing Eleanor to enter. The interior was dim after the harsh sunlight, but clean. The smell of soap and something cooking, rice maybe, drifted from the back of the house. Supper's at 6 if you want it. Extra $1. Eleanor's remaining money amounted to $3.37. Tomorrow's train ticket was paid for, but she'd need food for the journey back. And who knew what else? I'll just take some bread and water in my room, if that's acceptable. Mrs. Chen's expression softened fractionally. Bread's free. I'll bring tea instead of water. You look like you need it. Before Eleanor could protest or thank her, the woman disappeared through a doorway, leaving Eleanor alone in the narrow hallway with her trunk and the ruins of her future. The room was small, barely large enough for the iron bed, washstand, and single chair crammed inside, but it was clean, just as the sign had promised. A window looked out onto the street, giving Eleanor a view of the town that had rejected her before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. She set the trunk at the foot of the bed and sat down heavily. The mattress was thin, but better than the train seat she'd endured for 2 weeks. Her reflection stared back at her from the small mirror above the washstand. A woman of 26 with dark hair coming loose from its pins, gray eyes that had seen too much disappointment, and a traveling dress now coated in dust. Not beautiful. Mother had told her that plainly enough. You're handsome, she'd said. That's better than beautiful. Handsome lass. But handsome hadn't been enough for Samuel Pritchard. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Chen entered with a tray holding a thick slice of bread, butter, and a steaming cup of tea. You eat. She set the tray on the washstand. Then you sleep. Tomorrow you decide. Decide what? Eleanor took the tea gratefully, wrapping her hands around the cup's warmth despite the heat outside. The train leaves at 9. So? Maybe you get on it, maybe you don't. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. That man who talked to you at the station, Cade Mercer. Yes? He owns Iron Mesa Ranch. Big place north of town. His wife died 3 years ago in childbirth. The baby, too. Mrs. Chen's face remained impassive, but something in her voice suggested this information mattered. He doesn't come to town much. Today he came to pick up supplies and stayed to watch the train. First time in 6 months. Eleanor frowned. I don't understand why you're telling me this. Maybe I don't either, Mrs. Chen shrugged. But Cade Mercer doesn't make conversation with strangers. Not ever. So when he talks to someone, people notice. She left before Eleanor could respond, pulling the door shut with a soft click. Eleanor sipped her tea and stared at the darkening window. Outside, Red Hollow was settling into evening. Lamps flickered on in buildings along the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. The normal sounds of a town going about its business, indifferent to one woman's humiliation. She thought about Chicago, about her sister Margaret, who'd cried when Eleanor left but understood there was no other choice. The sewing work barely kept one person fed, let alone two. And with winter coming, with prices rising and Margaret's cough getting worse, Eleanor had done what she had to do. She'd answered Samuel Pritchard's advertisement because staying meant watching her sister slowly starve, or worse. She'd sold their mother's garnet ring and pearl earrings, the only valuable things they owned, to pay for the train ticket west. And now she was supposed to go back? Admit defeat? Crawl home to a sister who'd sacrificed everything to help her leave? No. The word formed in Eleanor's mind with surprising force. No, she wouldn't do that. But what else was there? She had $3. No prospects. No husband. No skills beyond basic housekeeping and sewing that dozens of other women in Red Hollow probably possessed. She finished the bread and tea as the sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible in their beauty. How could a place so harsh produce something so lovely? Sleep came in restless fragments. Eleanor dreamed of trains that never stopped moving, of her mother's grave being dug up to make room for new buildings, of Samuel Pritchard's face multiplying into a crowd of men, all holding rejection letters with her name on them. She woke before dawn, her dress wrinkled and damp with sweat. The room was still dark, but she could hear movement downstairs. Mrs. Chen starting her day. Eleanor washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair as neatly as she could manage, and made a decision. She wouldn't take the 9 o'clock train. She didn't know what she would do instead. But returning to Chicago felt like drowning. At least here, In this hostile place, she was still breathing. By the time she made it downstairs, the sky had lightened to gray. Mrs. Chen stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "You want breakfast?" Eleanor hesitated. How much would it cost to stay another night? $1.50 with breakfast and supper, $2 without. $2 would leave her with less than $1.50. But the train ticket was already paid for. If she didn't use it, Pritchard's money was wasted. There was something satisfying about that. "I'll take the room." Eleanor counted out the coins. "Without meals. I'll find work to pay for food." Mrs. Chen took the money without comment. "What kind of work?" "Sewing, housekeeping, cooking." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Anything respectable." Respectable work is hard to find for a woman on her own, especially one everyone knows came here to marry and got rejected. Mrs. Chen's bluntness was like a slap, but Eleanor didn't flinch. People talk. They're already talking about you. Let them talk." The words surprised Eleanor with their vehemence. "I'm staying anyway." Something shifted in Mrs. Chen's expression, not quite approval, but close. "You're tougher than you look. That's good. You'll need to be." The morning passed slowly. Eleanor changed into her other dress, a simpler brown cotton that was more practical for work, and ventured out to inquire at the general store, the restaurant, even the saloon, though that made her stomach turn. Everywhere, the answer was the same. No work. Sorry. Maybe try somewhere else. She could see it in their faces, hear it in the careful politeness of their rejections. They didn't want to hire the desperate mail-order bride. She was bad luck. An embarrassment. A reminder that sometimes dreams failed spectacularly. By noon, Eleanor's feet ached and her pride was in tatters. She sat on a bench outside the general store, trying to decide what to do next. Tomorrow she'd have even less money. The day after, less still. Eventually she'd have to choose between food and the boarding house, and then... "You still here?" Eleanor looked up to find Cade Mercer standing in front of her, blocking the sun. He held a burlap sack in one hand, supplies from the store probably, and regarded her with that same intense, unsettling focus as yesterday. "I am." She met his gaze directly. If he expected her to cower or apologize, he'd be disappointed. "Thought you were taking the morning train." "I changed my mind." "That's so." Mercer shifted the sack to his other hand. "You find work?" "Not yet." Eleanor forced herself to add, "I'm still looking." "Uh-huh." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then abruptly, "You know anything about keeping house?" Eleanor's heart jumped. "Yes, cooking, cleaning, mending. I managed a household for 3 years before—" She stopped herself. "Yes, I know how to keep house." "Can you handle isolation? My ranch is 8 miles from town. You'd be out there weeks at a time without seeing another woman." "I can handle it." "Hard work. No sitting around with tea and gossip." "I don't want to sit around." Eleanor stood, bringing herself closer to his height, though he still towered over her. "I want to work. I want to earn my keep." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I've got 3 men working for me, all of them decent, but they're men. You'd be the only woman on the property." "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Mercer?" "Maybe." He glanced past her at the street, at the people beginning to notice their conversation. "Or maybe I'm offering something else." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I won't be anyone's mistress." "Didn't ask you to be." His voice hardened. "I'm talking about marriage." The word hung between them like something physical. Eleanor stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You... what?" "Marriage." Mercer said it like he was discussing livestock. "Legal and proper. You'd be my wife, run my household, and in exchange you'd have security, protection, and a home. No one in this town would dare pity you then." "You don't know me." Eleanor's voice came out strangled. "You spoke to me for 5 minutes yesterday." "Don't need to know you to see you've got spine. That's more than most." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "I need help at the ranch. You need a place. We could both benefit." "That's insane." "Maybe." Mercer met her eyes again. "But you're still sitting here at noon instead of being halfway back to wherever you came from. So maybe insane is better than the alternative." Eleanor's mind raced. This was mad. Absolutely mad. She didn't know this man. He could be cruel, violent, anything. And yet he was offering her a choice, not charity, not pity, a business arrangement between two people who needed something from each other. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? Mercer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only Eleanor could hear. Because I watched you yesterday. Watched Pritchard hand you that letter and walk away like you were nothing. And you didn't cry, didn't beg, just stood there and took it. He paused. Woman who can do that is worth having around, even if it's just for keeping house. I need to think about this. Take your time. I'm in town until tomorrow morning. He touched his hat brim. If you decide yes, meet me at the stables at dawn. If not, then I hope you find what you're looking for elsewhere. He walked away before Eleanor could respond, disappearing around the corner with his supplies. And Eleanor sat back down on the bench, her heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. An offer of marriage from a stranger, or an offer of escape from humiliation, maybe both. The afternoon dragged endlessly. Eleanor walked the town's single street 3 times, thinking. She returned to her room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She counted her remaining money again and calculated how many days it would last. 2. Maybe 3 if she skipped meals. And then what? She thought about Margaret in Chicago, probably wondering why no letter had arrived yet. Eleanor had promised to write as soon as she reached Red Hollow. But what could she possibly say now? Dear Margaret, he rejected me before I got off the train. But don't worry, a strange rancher has offered to marry me instead. I'm sure it will be fine. The sun set again. Eleanor ate nothing, couldn't stomach food anyway. She lit the room's single candle and watched shadows dance across the walls. Cade Mercer was a stranger. She knew nothing about him except what Mrs. Chen had mentioned. Widower, rancher, isolated. And that he didn't come to town often, which meant either he was busy with work or deliberately avoiding people. But Samuel Pritchard had also been a stranger, and she'd been willing to marry him based on a few letters and a photograph. At least Mercer was honest about what he wanted. At least he'd looked her in the eye instead of handing her a rejection letter. Around midnight, Eleanor made her decision. She packed her trunk carefully, folding each garment with precision. Her hands didn't shake this time. When everything was arranged, she lay down in her clothes and waited for dawn. Mrs. Chen was already awake when Eleanor came downstairs. The older woman took one look at the trunk and nodded. Mercer? Yes. Good. Mrs. Chen handed her a paper-wrapped package. Biscuits for the ride. Don't let him tell you the ranch work is easy. It's not. But he's fair and he keeps his word. That's more than most men. Eleanor clutched the package. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. Mrs. Chen opened the door. And when you come back to town, you come see me. Tell me I was right about you being tough. The stables were at the edge of town, a low building that smelled of hay and horses and leather. In the gray pre-dawn light, Eleanor could make out a wagon hitched to 2 large horses. Cade Mercer stood beside it, checking the harness. He looked up as Eleanor approached with her trunk. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or relief, but it was gone too quickly to read. You came. I did. Eleanor set down the trunk. I accept your offer, Mr. Mercer, with one condition. His eyebrows rose. What condition? If this doesn't work, if either of us realizes we've made a terrible mistake, you'll give me enough money to return to Chicago. I won't be stranded here. Mercer considered this. Then, slowly, he nodded. Fair enough. Though I should warn you, I don't fail at things I set my mind to. Once you're my wife, that's what you'll be. Understood? Understood. Eleanor held out her hand. Do we have an agreement? He looked at her hand for a moment, then clasped it in his own. His grip was rough, calloused from years of hard labor, but it was also warm and steady. We have an agreement. He released her hand and lifted her trunk into the wagon as if it weighed nothing. Get in. It's a long ride, and I want to be home before noon. Eleanor climbed onto the wagon seat, arranging her skirts. Mercer swung up beside her and took the reins. The horses started forward with a jolt, and Red Hollow began to fall away behind them. As the sun crept above the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor glanced back one last time. Somewhere in that small, hostile town, Samuel Pritchard was probably waking up, believing he'd successfully rid himself of an unwanted burden. He had no idea that his rejection had pushed her toward something far more dangerous than a simple mail-order marriage. It had pushed her toward Cade Mercer and Iron Mesa Ranch, and whatever came next, for better or worse, Eleanor Hart was done running. The wagon wheels ground through sand and rock, each rotation taking Eleanor farther from everything familiar. Cade Mercer drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the desert ahead, jaw set in a way that didn't invite conversation. Eleanor gripped the edge of the wooden seat and tried not to think about what she'd just agreed to. Marriage to a stranger. Again. Except this time, at least the stranger had been honest about his intentions. The landscape changed as they traveled north. Red Hollow's dusty streets gave way to open territory, endless stretches of scrub brush, twisted mesquite trees, and rocks that jutted from the earth like broken bones. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something that shimmered and moved. Eleanor's dress clung to her back, damp with sweat despite the dry heat. How much farther? She finally broke the silence after what felt like hours. Another hour, maybe less. Mercer didn't look at her. You thirsty? A little. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a canteen, handing it to her without slowing the horses. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but Eleanor drank gratefully. Thank you. Mercer just nodded, taking the canteen back and replacing it. The silence stretched out again, but this time Eleanor found it less oppressive. She studied him from the corner of her eye, the way he held the reins with an easy confidence, how his shoulders stayed relaxed despite the rough terrain. A man used to hard work and solitude. Tell me about the ranch. Eleanor kept her voice steady, businesslike. What should I expect? It's not fancy. Mercer's tone matched hers, practical, distant. Main house needs work. I've let things slide since... He stopped, then continued. Since Mary died. The hands eat in the bunkhouse mostly. Kitchen's functional but barely. How many men work for you? 3 full-time. Tommy's been with me 8 years. Good with horses but doesn't talk much. Ezra's newer, maybe 2 years. Strong back, follows orders. And Joaquin, he's the cook for the hands, handles most of the heavy repairs. Eleanor absorbed this information. 3 strange men she'd be living near. And they know about this arrangement? They know I went to town for supplies. They'll figure out the rest when we arrive. Mercer glanced at her briefly. They're decent men, but if any of them steps out of line, you tell me. Understood? Understood. Eleanor paused. What happened to your wife? The question hung in the air between them. Mercer's hands tightened on the reins, and for a moment Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Childbirth? The word came out flat, emotionless. Baby came early. We were too far from town, and by the time I got the doctor out there, he stopped. They both died the same night. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't know her. But something in his voice suggested the loss still cut deep, even 3 years later. Point is, the house hasn't had a woman's touch in a long time. You'll have your work cut out for you. Eleanor looked down at her hands, already roughened from years of sewing and housework in Chicago. I'm not afraid of work. Good, because there's plenty of it. They crested a rise, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. A valley stretched out below, carved by a creek that caught the sunlight in flashes of silver. And there, nestled against a rocky outcrop, stood the ranch. Iron Mesa wasn't impressive. The main house was a low adobe structure with a sagging porch and windows that needed washing. Behind it, a barn leaned slightly to one side, and farther back she could see what must be the bunkhouse and several smaller outbuildings. Fencing stretched in all directions, enclosing pastures where cattle grazed in scattered groups. It looked tired, neglected, like a place that had given up trying to be more than it was. That's home. Mercer's voice held no pride, just statement of fact. Not much to look at. It's... Eleanor searched for something honest to say. It's more isolated than I expected. That bother you? I don't know yet. She met his eyes. Ask me again in a month. Something that might have been approval flickered across Mercer's face. Fair answer. As they descended into the valley, Eleanor spotted movement near the barn. Two men emerged, shading their eyes against the sun to watch the approaching wagon. By the time Mercer pulled up in front of the house, a third man had joined them, older, with gray hair and skin weathered dark by years of sun. "Boss?" The gray-haired man nodded at Mercer, then his gaze shifted to Eleanor. His expression didn't change, but she saw the question in his eyes. "Tommy, Ezra, Joaquin?" Mercer set the brake and climbed down. "This is Eleanor Hart. We're getting married. She'll be running the house from now on." The three men exchanged glances. Tommy, the gray-haired one, recovered first. "Married." He turned the word over carefully. "Well, congratulations, I suppose." "We need a witness." Mercer helped Eleanor down from the wagon. "And someone who can read the ceremony. That you, Tommy?" "Can read well enough." Tommy scratched his jaw. "You wanting to do this now?" "Soon as possible." Mercer retrieved Eleanor's trunk. "No point waiting." Eleanor's stomach clenched. She'd known this was coming, had agreed to it even, but the reality of it suddenly felt overwhelming. Married within hours of arriving, to a man she'd spoken to for maybe 30 minutes total. "I should—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "I should change. Wash up." "Right." Mercer carried the trunk toward the house. "I'll show you where you'll sleep. You can have Mary's old room until they were actually married, until she'd be expected to share his bed." Eleanor followed him inside, trying not to stumble over the threshold. The house's interior was dim and surprisingly cool after the brutal sun. A main room served as kitchen and living space combined, rough furniture, a cast-iron stove, shelves holding mismatched dishes. Dust covered everything. Two doors led off the main room, and Mercer headed toward the one on the right. This was Mary's room. After she died, I couldn't... He set the trunk down at the foot of a narrow bed. "Anyway, it's yours now. There's a basin and pitcher. Water's in the barrel outside the back door." The room was small but private, with a single window overlooking the valley. A dresser stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a hairbrush with strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. Eleanor looked away quickly. "Thank you." Mercer lingered in the doorway, seeming uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "This doesn't have to be... we can take time before..." He stopped, frustrated. "What I'm trying to say is, I'm not expecting you to... I understand." Eleanor kept her voice level, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "This is a business arrangement. We can discuss those particulars later." Relief crossed his face. "Later. Right." He backed toward the door. "Take your time. I'll be outside when you're ready." When he left, Eleanor sank onto the bed and pressed her hands to her face. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was happening. Actually happening. In less than an hour, she'd be married to Cade Mercer. She forced herself to stand and opened her trunk. The navy traveling dress was wrinkled and dusty, but it was still the nicest thing she owned. Eleanor changed quickly, using the water from the barrel to wash her face and hands, then repinned her hair with shaking fingers. In the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized herself. Pale face, two bright eyes, hair that refused to stay properly contained. Not a blushing bride. More like a woman about to walk into a firing squad. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You've survived worse." Had she, though? What was worse than marrying a stranger out of sheer desperation? But thinking like that wouldn't help. Eleanor smoothed her dress one final time and walked back into the main room. The four men stood waiting, Mercer near the door, the three ranch hands arranged awkwardly behind him. Someone had made an attempt to clean up. The table had been wiped down, and a few wildflowers in a tin can served as decoration. The sight of those flowers, scraggly and half-wilted but clearly gathered with good intention, made Eleanor's throat tight. "You look nice." Mercer's voice was gruff but sincere. "Thank you." Eleanor took her place beside him, clasping her hands together to keep them from trembling. Tommy stepped forward, holding a worn book that Eleanor recognized as a Bible. She hadn't seen Mercer carry it in, which meant it must have already been in the house. For a man who never went to church, according to Mrs. Chen's gossip, he'd at least kept the book. "Never done this before," Tommy admitted, "but I'll do my best." He opened the book to a marked page and cleared his throat. We're gathered here to join Cade Mercer and Eleanor Hart in matrimony. If anyone knows a reason these two shouldn't be wed, speak now or just get on with it, Tommy. Mercer's impatience cut through the formal words. Tommy's mouth twitched. Right. Do you, Cade Mercer, take Eleanor Hart as your lawful wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. And do you, Eleanor Hart, take Cade Mercer as your lawful wedded husband to have and to hold from this day forward? This was it. The last chance to change her mind, to refuse, to demand that Mercer take her back to Red Hollow and put her on the next train east. Eleanor thought of Samuel Pritchard's rejection letter, of her sister coughing blood into a handkerchief she tried to hide, of the tiny apartment in Chicago with its thin walls and the smell of despair that clung to everything. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by... Tommy faltered. Well, by reading this book, I suppose, I pronounce you husband and wife. He looked at Mercer. You can kiss her now, I guess. Eleanor's heart stopped. She hadn't thought about this part. Mercer turned toward her, and she saw the same uncertainty in his face that she felt. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Mercer leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, chaste, barely more than a touch. It was over in seconds, but Eleanor felt the warmth of it down to her bones. There. Mercer stepped back quickly. It's done. Joaquin started clapping, and the others joined in, awkward, scattered applause that echoed in the small room. Eleanor managed to smile, though her face felt frozen. Congratulations, Mrs. Mercer. Tommy held out his hand, and Eleanor shook it on instinct. The name sent a jolt through her. Mrs. Mercer, not Miss Hart anymore. She'd traded one identity for another in the space of a single sentence. Thank you, all of you. Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she expected. I'm grateful for your kindness. Ezra, the youngest of the three hands, shifted his weight nervously. He couldn't be more than 20, with sandy hair and a face that still held some softness. Ma'am, do you want us to move our things out of the kitchen? Give you and the boss some privacy? No need for that yet. Mercer cut in before Eleanor could answer. Things will continue as they have been for now. Eleanor will take over the house gradually. He glanced at her. Unless you want them gone immediately. No, that's fine. Eleanor looked at the three men, trying to memorize their faces. I'd appreciate help learning the routine here. I don't want to disrupt everything all at once. Tommy nodded approvingly. Sensible. I like that. He elbowed Joaquin. See? We might actually get decent meals now. My cooking is decent, Joaquin protested, but he was grinning. Just not fancy. It's not even decent, Ezra muttered. Last week's stew tasted like saddle leather. That's because it was saddle leather, Joaquin shot back. Meat was spoiled. What else was I supposed to do? The easy banter between them loosened something in Eleanor's chest. These weren't refined men, but they seemed genuine, honest. That was more than she'd gotten from Samuel Pritchard, with all his proper letters and false promises. All right, that's enough, Mercer's voice cut through the joking. Back to work, all of you. We've got that fence to repair before dark. The three men filed out, still ribbing each other good-naturedly. When the door closed behind them, Eleanor found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since the ceremony. The silence felt different now, heavier. So, Mercer rubbed the back of his neck. I should show you around properly, where everything is, what needs doing. That would be helpful. Eleanor followed him back into the kitchen area. I noticed you don't have much in the way of supplies. We stock up monthly, usually make do with basics, beans, flour, salt pork, nothing fancy. He opened a cupboard to reveal mostly empty shelves. Mary used to keep a garden out back, but it died when she did. Haven't had the time or inclination to restart it. Eleanor examined the pantry, mentally cataloging what was there and what was desperately needed. I'll make a list. Next time someone goes to town, we can pick up essentials. Tommy goes every other week for supplies. You can ride with him if you want. Mercer paused. Or stay here. Up to you. I'll stay. The answer came without thought. Eleanor had no desire to return to Red Hollow and face the stares, the whispers. Better to remain hidden at Iron Mesa until enough time passed that people forgot about the rejected mail-order bride. They moved through the house room by room. Besides Mary's old room, now Eleanor's, there was Mercer's bedroom, spare and utilitarian, with a bed too large for one person and blankets that smelled like dust. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and what passed for a parlor. A back door led to a small yard where the water barrel stood, along with a crude washing area and an outhouse that had seen better days. "It's not much," Mercer said again, and Eleanor heard the defensiveness beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "It's honest work maintaining it," she replied. "That's more than some places can claim." Something in Mercer's expression softened. "You really mean that?" "I do." Eleanor turned to face him directly. "Mr. Mercer?" "Cade. We're married now. Might as well use first names." "Cade." The name felt strange in her mouth. "I want you to understand something. I didn't come west looking for luxury or comfort. I came because I was desperate. You're giving me a chance when no one else would. I won't take that lightly." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone meeker. More delicate." He shrugged. "Most women who come out here as brides, they don't last. Too hard. Too isolated. They either run back east or they break." "I won't break." Eleanor said it with more confidence than she felt. "And I have nowhere to run back to." "That makes two of us, then." Cade moved toward the door. "I need to help with that fence repair. You can settle in, look around, do whatever you need. Supper's usually at 6. Joaquin will cook tonight, but starting tomorrow, that'll be your job if you're up for it." "I'm up for it." He nodded and left, and Eleanor was finally alone in her new home. She stood in the center of the main room and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. The dusty shelves, the floor that hadn't been swept properly in months, maybe years, the stove that was crusted with old grease, the windows so dirty they barely let in light. It was overwhelming. The sheer amount of work needed to make this place livable felt impossible. But Eleanor had survived her mother's death. She'd survived poverty in Chicago, watching her sister grow sicker while being unable to afford a doctor. She'd survived the humiliation of Samuel Pritchard's rejection in front of an entire town. She could survive this too. Rolling up her sleeves, Eleanor found a bucket and rag and started with the windows. The water from the barrel was cold, and scrubbing the years of grime away made her arms ache, but slowly the glass cleared. Light flooded in, transforming the room. By the time the men returned for supper, Eleanor had cleaned 3 windows, swept the floor, and reorganized the pantry into something that made sense. Joaquin came through the door carrying a pot of something that smelled like beans and onions. He stopped when he saw the changes. "You've been busy." "Just getting started." Eleanor wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "I hope you don't mind. I rearranged some things in the pantry." "Mind?" "Ma'am, you can rearrange whatever you want if it means we can actually find what we're looking for." Joaquin set the pot on the table. "Fair warning, though, this won't be the best meal you ever had." "I'm sure it's fine." It wasn't fine. The beans were undercooked and the salt pork was more fat than meat, but Eleanor ate without complaint. Around the table, the 4 men talked about the day's work. Fence posts that needed replacing, a section of the creek that was running low, signs of coyotes near the herd. Eleanor listened, learning. Tommy was clearly the senior hand, the one Cade trusted most. Ezra was eager to please but still learning. Joaquin knew the property inside and out and wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even to Cade. And Cade himself. Eleanor watched him as he ate, noting how he listened more than he spoke, how his eyes tracked everything happening at the table. A man who'd learned to pay attention, to notice details. After supper, the hands retreated to the bunkhouse, and Eleanor began cleaning up. She'd just started washing dishes when Cade appeared beside her with a towel. "I'll dry." They worked in silence for a few minutes, falling into an easy rhythm. Eleanor washed, Cade dried, and put away. It felt domestic, almost comfortable. "You did good work today," Cade said finally. "Place looks better already." "There's still a lot to do." "I know, but you made progress. That matters." He set down a plate and turned to face her. "Eleanor, about tonight, you sleep in your room, I sleep in mine." Eleanor kept her eyes on the dishes. "We agreed this was a business arrangement. Let's keep it that way for now." Relief flooded his face. "All right, but eventually we'll figure it out." Eleanor met his eyes. "One day at a time." "One day at a time," he echoed. I can work with that. That first night in her new bed, Eleanor lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert. Wind rattling the windows. Something howling in the distance, coyotes probably. The creak of the house settling. She'd done it. Married a stranger and moved to an isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere. It should have felt like the end of something. Instead, lying there in the darkness, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn to find the house already empty. Through the window, she could see figures moving in the pre-dawn light, the men starting their day. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. The pantry was worse than she'd thought. Almost no eggs. The bacon was rancid. She'd have to make do with biscuits and the last of the coffee. By the time the men came in for breakfast, Eleanor had managed to produce something edible. Not good, but better than nothing. They ate without complaint, though she caught Ezra eyeing the biscuits with something less than enthusiasm. "I'll need to go over the supplies with someone," Eleanor announced. "We're running low on almost everything." "Make a list," Cade pushed back from the table. "Tommy heads to town day after tomorrow. He can pick up whatever you need." "I'll have it ready." The men left again, and Eleanor began her real work. She attacked the house room by room, scrubbing years of neglect away. The stove took 2 hours to clean properly. The floors revealed their actual color once she'd swept and scrubbed them. She found mouse droppings in the pantry and spent another hour sealing every crack and gap she could find. By noon, her back ached and her hands were raw, but the kitchen looked almost civilized. She was standing in the yard, hanging wet rags to dry, when Joaquin appeared around the corner of the house. "Ma'am, got a minute?" "Of course." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. "What can I do for you?" "It's more what I can do for you." He gestured toward a neglected patch of earth behind the house. "That was Mrs. Mary's garden. Boss said you might want to start it up again. I could help with the heavy digging if you want." Eleanor walked over to examine the plot. It was overrun with weeds, the soil hard and cracked. But the space was protected from the worst of the sun by the house's shadow, and she could see remnants of what had been there before. Stakes that once held plants, a broken irrigation channel. How much work would it take? A lot. Joaquin was honest, at least. We'd need to turn the soil, bring in manure, set up irrigation from the creek. Couple weeks of hard labor, probably. Then we should start today. Eleanor turned to face him. "If I'm going to feed everyone properly, we need fresh vegetables. Show me what to do." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, Joaquin breaking up the hardest ground while Eleanor pulled weeds and cleared debris. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Eleanor's dress stuck to her back, but she kept going. This garden could mean the difference between surviving and actually living out here. When Cade came looking for them at sundown, he found them both covered in dirt, surrounded by piles of weeds. "What's all this?" "Starting the garden back up." Eleanor straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. "Joaquin's been helping." Cade looked at the torn-up plot, then at Eleanor's dirt-streaked face. "You don't waste time, do you?" "No point in wasting it." Eleanor met his eyes. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." "No, it's good." He cut her off. "It's good to see this place coming back to life." He cleared his throat. "Joaquin, thanks for helping. You can head to the bunkhouse. Eleanor, you should come inside. You've done enough for today." Inside, Eleanor pumped water into a basin and scrubbed her hands and face. She'd never been so tired in her life. Every muscle screamed, but it was a good exhaustion, earned through actual progress. Supper that night was Eleanor's first attempt at cooking for the men. She'd managed to salvage the beans and make something resembling cornbread with the limited supplies. It wasn't fancy, but it was edible, and the men ate without complaining. "Better than my cooking already," Joaquin announced. "Ma'am, you're a miracle worker." "Hardly," but Eleanor felt warmth at the compliment. "Wait until we actually have proper ingredients. Then I'll show you real cooking." After the men left, Cade lingered at the table. Eleanor was wiping down the counter when he spoke. "You're doing well here." "It's only been 1 day." "Still, some women—" He trailed off. "Mary used to cry for the first month. Hated the isolation, the work, all of it. Took her a long time to adjust." Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying, that Mary might never have fully adjusted, that this place had broken her spirit long before childbirth took her life. "I'm not Mary." Eleanor kept her voice gentle. I know you still miss her, but I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just trying to survive this. I know. Cade stood, moving toward his bedroom. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here, even if the circumstances were unconventional. That night, Eleanor fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, too exhausted even to worry about whether she'd made the right choice. The days began to blur together into a routine. Up before dawn to make breakfast, clean up after the men left, work on the house, the garden, the endless list of tasks that needed doing. Make lunch if the men came in for it, though usually they ate whatever Joaquin packed for them. More work in the afternoon. Start supper. Clean up after supper. Fall into bed exhausted. A week passed. Then 2. The house transformed under Eleanor's relentless attention. The windows sparkled. The floors stayed clean. The pantry was organized and well-stocked after Tommy's supply run. She'd even managed to patch the holes in the curtains, though the fabric was so worn she'd eventually need to replace them entirely. The garden was taking shape too. With Joaquin's help, Eleanor had turned the soil, added manure, and dug irrigation channels from the creek. She'd planted seeds for vegetables that could handle the heat: squash, beans, peppers. It would be weeks before anything grew, but the potential was there. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Eleanor started to feel something she hadn't expected. At home. Not comfortable, exactly. The work was still brutal, the isolation still pressing. But there was something satisfying about ending each day knowing she'd made progress. About seeing the results of her labor in clean floors and organized shelves. About sitting at the table with Cade and the hands and being part of something larger than herself. 3 weeks after the wedding, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. A rider was coming up the valley road, not one of their hands, someone from town. Cade emerged from the barn, Tommy and Ezra behind him. They all watched the rider approach, tension radiating from their postures. The man who dismounted was young, probably not yet 30, with sandy hair and an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore town clothes, clean shirt, pressed trousers, boots that had never seen a day of real work. Mercer, he nodded at Cade. Been a while. Garrett, Cade's voice was cold. What do you want? Can't a man visit an old friend? We were never friends? Garrett's smile widened. True enough. His gaze shifted to Eleanor, and she felt it like oil sliding across her skin. And this must be the famous bride. I heard you got married. Didn't believe it until now. Eleanor stepped forward, refusing to be cowed. I'm Eleanor Mercer. And you are? James Garrett. My family owns the land east of here. He tipped his hat mockingly. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Mercer. Though I have to say I'm surprised you'd settle for this place when you could have had better. Better how? Eleanor kept her voice level. Well, for starters, you could have married into a ranch that actually makes money. Garrett gestured at Iron Mesa. No offense, Mercer, but everyone knows you're barely scraping by. One bad season away from losing everything. Get to the point. Cade's hand had moved to his hip, where Eleanor now noticed he wore a gun. She hadn't seen him armed before. Why are you here? Business proposition. Same one I've been making for years. Garrett pulled out a cigarette and lit it, taking his time. Sell me the creek rights. I'll pay fair price. More than fair, actually. You'd have enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere easier. The answer's still no. Cade, be reasonable. You need that water to keep your herd alive, but I need it more. My land's bigger. My operation's larger. It makes sense for me to control the water. It makes sense for you to have a monopoly, you mean? Cade's voice was hard. Every other small rancher in this valley depends on that creek too. If you control the water, you control everything. Progress, Mercer. That's what this is. Small operations like yours can't compete anymore. Garrett flicked ash from his cigarette. I'm offering you a way out before you lose it all anyway. We're not losing anything. Eleanor surprised herself by speaking up. And we're not selling. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Awful confident for someone who's been here 3 weeks. Mas, how did you... Eleanor stopped. Of course he knew. Everyone in Red Hollow knew. The whole territory probably knew about the rejected mail-order bride who'd married Cade Mercer the same day she arrived. Small territory, Mrs. Mercer. People talk. Garrett dropped his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Word is you were supposed to marry Sam Pritchard. He took one look and changed his mind. That must sting. Watch your mouth. Cade's voice dropped to something dangerous. I'm just saying she's clearly desperate enough to take whatever she can get, which means she doesn't understand what she's gotten herself into here. Garrett remounted his horse. Think about my offer, Mercer, because next time I come back, the price might not be so generous. He rode off, dust rising behind his horse. Eleanor watched him go, her hands clenched into fists. Who was that? Trouble. Cade spat in the dirt. The Garrett family's been trying to buy out small ranchers for years. They already own half the territory. Want to own all of it. Why would they need your water rights specifically? Because without this creek, their entire operation upstream suffers during dry season, and they can't move their herd to better grazing without crossing my land. Cade turned to look at her. He wasn't lying about one thing, though. We are barely scraping by. One bad season, one major loss, and we could go under. Then we don't have a bad season. Eleanor said it with more confidence than she felt. We work harder. We make this ranch profitable enough that selling never has to be an option. Tommy, who'd been silent until now, let out a low whistle. Ma'am, I appreciate the spirit, but it's not that simple. We're already working as hard as we can. Then we work smarter. Eleanor looked at each of them. There has to be something we can do to improve our position. Better breeding, different crops, something. She's right, Ezra spoke up quietly. My uncle's ranch down south, they started raising horses alongside cattle, sold them to the army, made good money. Horses require different expertise. Cade rubbed his jaw. But it's not a bad idea. Tommy, you're good with horses. Think we could manage it? Maybe. Would take capital to start, though. Good breeding stock doesn't come cheap. Then we save for it. Eleanor felt something fierce rising in her chest. We make this work, because I didn't come all this way just to lose everything to men like James Garrett. Cade looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition that she wasn't going to fold at the first sign of trouble. All right, then. He nodded slowly. We make it work. But that night, lying in bed, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that James Garrett's visit was just the beginning. The way he'd looked at the ranch, at her, at Cade, like they were obstacles to be removed rather than people to be negotiated with. Whatever was coming, it was going to be worse than isolation and hard work. It was going to be a fight. Eleanor's intuition proved correct within the week. She was in the garden early one morning, checking on the first green shoots finally breaking through the soil, when she heard raised voices from the direction of the barn. Not arguing exactly, but the kind of tense conversation that preceded trouble. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and walked toward the sound. Cade stood with Tommy and two men Eleanor didn't recognize, rough-looking types with guns worn low on their hips and eyes that tracked movement like predators. I'm telling you, we found 3 head dead by the north fence. The taller of the two strangers had a voice like gravel. Throats cut. Someone stealing cattle and covering their tracks. Could be coyotes. Tommy sounded doubtful, even as he said it. Coyotes don't cut throats clean and leave the meat to rot. The shorter man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. This was deliberate. Cade's jaw was tight. When? Last night, probably. We noticed them this morning during the count. The tall man finally spotted Eleanor approaching and fell silent. My wife. Cade's voice held a warning. She can hear this. Eleanor stopped beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. What's happened? This is Jack and Pete. They work the north section. Cade gestured at the two men. They found dead cattle. Someone's either trying to spook us or sending a message. Garrett, Eleanor said it with certainty. Can't prove it. Jack shrugged. But yeah, that'd be my guess too. His men have been spotted near our boundary line 3 times this month. Show me. Cade was already moving toward his horse. Tommy, get Joaquin and Ezra. Tell them to check the other sections. Make sure this wasn't just the start of something bigger. I'm coming with you. Eleanor spoke before thinking it through. Cade turned. Eleanor, I'm not asking permission. If this ranch is my home now, I need to understand what we're facing. She met his eyes steadily. Besides, an extra set of eyes won't hurt. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he gave a sharp nod. Fine, but you stay close to me. Understood? Understood. The ride north took nearly an hour. Eleanor had never been this far from the main house, and the landscape grew increasingly harsh, more rock than soil, twisted trees that looked half dead, and endless stretches of scrub that offered no shade from the climbing sun. Her borrowed horse, a placid mare named Bess, picked her way carefully through the rough terrain while Eleanor tried not to think about how exposed they were out here. The dead cattle lay near a section of fence that marked the boundary between Iron Mesa and Garrett land. Eleanor smelled them before she saw them, the sweet, sickening stench of death in the heat. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to gag. "Stay back!" Cade dismounted and approached the carcasses. Eleanor watched him crouch beside the nearest one, examining it with a practiced eye that spoke of too much experience with death. Clean cuts. He looked up at Jack. "Professional work. This wasn't random killing." "Want us to bury them?" Pete asked. "Not yet." Cade stood, scanning the surrounding area. "I want to document this first. If we need to involve the law, we'll need evidence." "The law?" Jack laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Davies is in Garrett's pocket. Has been for years. Even if we showed him this, nothing would happen. Then we handle it ourselves." Cade's voice went cold in a way that made Eleanor's skin prickle. "Handle it how?" She dismounted despite his earlier warning to stay back. The dead cattle were horrific up close, flies already swarming, the cuts across their throats precise and brutal. "We can't just start a range war." "Why not?" Pete fingered his gun. "Garrett's already started one. He killed our stock. That's an act of war in my book." "Because a war is exactly what he wants." Eleanor forced herself to think past the visceral horror of the scene. "He wants us to retaliate, to do something that gives him an excuse to bring in the law or rally the other ranchers against us. We'd be playing right into his hands." "She's right." Tommy had ridden up during the conversation, Joaquin beside him. "Garrett's clever. He wouldn't do this unless he had a plan for what comes next. So what then?" Jack's frustration was palpable. "We just let him kill our cattle and do nothing?" "We do something." Cade's eyes were still fixed on the fence line. "But we do it smart. Tommy, I want guards posted every night, rotating shifts, 2 men at a time. If anyone comes near our herd again, we catch them in the act." "That'll stretch us thin," Joaquin pointed out. "We barely have enough hands to manage the regular work as it is." "Then we'll work harder." Cade turned to Eleanor. "You said you wanted to help make this ranch profitable. Here's your chance. We need to keep things running even with half our men on night watch. That means you'll have to take on more." "Tell me what needs doing." "The chickens need tending twice a day. The garden needs watering. The house still needs work. And we'll need hot food ready at odd hours for the night guards." Cade listed it matter-of-factly. "It's more than one person should have to manage." "I'll manage." Eleanor said it with more confidence than she felt. "What else?" "Nothing else. That's already too much." But there was something in Cade's expression, approval, maybe, or the beginning of actual respect. "We should head back. I want everyone armed and alert until we know what Garrett's planning next." The ride home was tense and silent. Eleanor kept replaying the image of those dead cattle, the precision of the cuts. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't random violence, it was calculated intimidation. Back at the ranch, Cade gathered everyone for a meeting. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of orange and red that should have been beautiful, but instead felt ominous. "Here's how this works." Cade stood with his back to the barn, addressing the assembled men. "Jack and Pete, you take first watch tonight. North section. Tommy and Ezra, you relieve them at midnight. Joaquin, you're on standby in case something happens. Everyone carries rifles, not just sidearms. And if you see anyone, I don't care who, you challenge them first. Shoot second." "What about during the day?" Ezra asked. "Should we be worried about daytime attacks?" "Garrett's too smart for that. He'll stick to night work, keep himself at arm's length from the actual crime." Cade's mouth was a hard line. "But stay alert regardless, and no one goes anywhere alone from now on." Eleanor listened, trying to absorb the new reality. This wasn't just hard work and isolation anymore. This was danger. Real physical danger that could get someone killed. After the meeting dispersed, she found herself alone in the kitchen, staring at the supplies she'd need to prepare for irregular mealtimes. The exhaustion that had become familiar over the past weeks felt heavier now, weighted with worry. "You're thinking too loud." Cade's voice came from the doorway. "I can hear it from outside. I'm thinking we might be in over our heads." Eleanor didn't turn around. Those cattle weren't just killed. They were butchered as a message. What's the next message going to be? I don't know. Cade moved to stand beside her. But I know we can't back down. If we show weakness now, Garrett will push harder. He'll take everything. And if we fight back, people might die. Eleanor finally looked at him. Including you. Including me. You scared? Terrified. She said it honestly. But that doesn't mean I'm leaving. Something shifted in Cade's face. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost intimate, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. You're braver than you think. His voice was low. Most women would have run at the first sign of trouble, but you're still here, covered in garden dirt, planning how to feed night guards. Bravery or stupidity? Hard to tell the difference sometimes. But Eleanor didn't move away from his touch. Cade, what if we can't win this? Then we lose fighting instead of lose surrendering. He dropped his hand. I've lost too much in my life already. This ranch, this land, it's all I have left of Mary, of the life we were supposed to build. I won't give it up without a fight. Eleanor understood then. This wasn't just about water rights or property. For Cade, Iron Mesa represented something he couldn't let go of. The last connection to a wife and child who'd died too soon. Losing the ranch would mean losing them all over again. Then we fight smart. Eleanor turned back to the pantry, already making mental calculations. If we're doing night watches, the men will need substantial meals before their shifts. Protein, carbohydrates, something that'll keep them alert. I can make stew, it'll stay hot for hours. And coffee, lots of coffee. Eleanor. Cade waited until she looked at him. Thank you for not running. Where would I run to? But she softened it with a small smile. Besides, someone needs to make sure you all don't starve while you're busy playing soldier. The next few days established a new, harder rhythm. Eleanor was up before dawn, preparing breakfast for exhausted men coming off night watch and those about to start their day. The garden demanded attention despite everything else: water, weeding, checking for pests. The chickens Cade had mentioned turned out to be a dozen scraggly hens that had been largely neglected since Mary's death. Eleanor rebuilt their coop, established a feeding schedule, and within 3 days had fresh eggs for the first time in months. Between tasks, she found herself watching the valley, alert for any sign of trouble. Once she spotted riders in the distance, and her heart seized until she recognized Tommy and Ezra returning from patrol. Another time, gunshots echoed from somewhere north, and she'd stood frozen in the garden until Joaquin came to tell her it was just target practice. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but worse than the physical demands was the isolation. With all the men focused on security and survival, there was no time for conversation, for normalcy. Meals became hurried affairs where everyone ate standing up, ready to move at a moment's notice. The easy camaraderie Eleanor had begun to feel with the hands evaporated under the weight of threat. A week after finding the dead cattle, Tommy rode to Red Hollow for supplies. Eleanor gave him her carefully compiled list and a portion of their dwindling money, knowing they couldn't afford even half of what they needed, but having no choice. He returned at sunset, his face grim. Garrett's been talking in town. Tommy unloaded supplies while Eleanor and Cade listened, telling anyone who'll listen that Mercer's losing control of his herd, that the ranch is falling apart, that you're barely keeping afloat. All true, unfortunately. Cade's voice was bitter. What else? He's making offers. To your neighbors? To the small ranchers. Generous prices for their land. Tommy paused. 3 have sold already. The Martinez place, Old Ben's property, and the Widow Callahan's spread. 3. Cade's face went pale. That gives him controlling interest in the North Valley water. If he gets one more, then he can legally restrict creek access to anyone he wants, Tommy finished, including us. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. Can he do that? Just shut off water? If he owns enough land along the creek, yes. Cade paced, his movements sharp with anger. There are water rights, but they're complicated. With enough money for lawyers and enough influence with the territorial government, Garrett could tie us up in legal battles for years. By the time it's settled, we'd be bankrupted by legal fees. So we need to keep the remaining ranchers from selling. Eleanor's mind was already working through the problem. Who else is left that Garrett would target? The Johnsons, maybe. They've got a small place east of here. Tommy counted on his fingers. The Chen family, Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, her brother runs a ranch west of town. And there's Whitmore, but he's stubborn as they come. Won't sell on principle. 3 properties. Cade stopped pacing. If just one more sells, we're finished. Then we convince them not to. Eleanor surprised herself with how steady she sounded. We talk to them. We show them that standing together is their best chance. They won't listen to me. Cade's laugh was harsh. I'm not exactly popular. I keep to myself, always have. They don't trust me. But they might listen to Eleanor. Tommy spoke up quietly. You're new. You don't have history with these people. And you're a woman. That'll open doors that stay closed to Cade. Eleanor stared at him. You want me to ride around the territory, convincing strangers not to sell their land? I want you to try. Cade looked at her directly. I know it's asking a lot, but you said you wanted to help save this ranch. This might be our only chance. It was asking a lot. It was asking everything. Eleanor had been at Iron Mesa barely a month. She didn't know these people, didn't understand the intricate web of relationships and old grudges that governed life out here. And she was exhausted, stretched thin by the constant demands of keeping everyone fed and the household running while the men focused on security. But she thought of those dead cattle, of James Garrett's smug face, of Cade's quiet desperation when he talked about losing the last connection to his dead wife. I'll do it. The words came out before she could second-guess them. But I'll need help, someone to ride with me, make introductions. And I'll need to understand exactly what I'm arguing for. I'll go with you, Tommy offered immediately. I know most of the families. They'll at least hear us out. Then we start tomorrow. Eleanor looked at Cade. What do I tell them? Why should they trust us over Garrett's money? Cade thought for a long moment. Tell them the truth. That Garrett's buying control, not land. That once he has enough power, he'll squeeze everyone dry. Tell them, he paused. Tell them that sometimes survival means standing with your neighbors instead of selling them out. The next morning, Eleanor found herself back on Bess, riding toward the Johnson Ranch with Tommy beside her. She'd worn her best remaining dress, the navy one from her arrival, carefully cleaned and mended. First impressions mattered, and she needed these people to see someone competent, not desperate. The Johnson place was smaller than Iron Mesa, barely more than a cabin and a few acres of grazing land. But it was tidy, well-maintained, and the herd Eleanor spotted looked healthy. Whoever ran this place knew their business. A woman emerged as they approached, middle-aged, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that assessed them coolly. Mrs. Johnson. Tommy dismounted. This is Eleanor Mercer, Cade's wife. I heard he got married. Mrs. Johnson's gaze raked over Eleanor. Heard it was sudden. It was. Eleanor climbed down, refusing to be intimidated. May we speak with you? It's about James Garrett. I figured, Mrs. Johnson gestured toward the cabin. Might as well come inside, no point standing in the sun. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. Mrs. Johnson poured water from a pitcher without asking if they wanted any. Hospitality or habit, Eleanor couldn't tell. Garrett came by 3 days ago. Mrs. Johnson sat heavily in a wooden chair. Offered me twice what this place is worth. Said I could move to town, live comfortable, not have to work myself to death anymore. Tempting offer. Eleanor kept her voice neutral. Damn right it's tempting. Mrs. Johnson's laugh was sharp. I've been running this place alone since my husband died 2 years ago. It's back-breaking work for almost no return. So you tell me, Mrs. Mercer, why shouldn't I take Garrett's money and get out while I can? Eleanor had prepared arguments about water rights and community solidarity. But looking at this exhausted woman in her worn dress, hands gnarled from hard labor, those arguments felt hollow. I can't tell you what to do. Eleanor set down her water cup. If you need to sell, that's your choice. But I think you should know what you'd be selling to. Money's money. Don't matter who it comes from. It does if that person uses what they bought to hurt others. Eleanor leaned forward. Garrett's not buying land because he needs more grazing room. He's buying control over the water. Once he has enough properties along the creek, he can restrict access to anyone he wants, including your neighbors, including people you've known for years. Not my problem once I've sold. No. But it becomes their problem, and the next person Garrett pushes out, and the next. Eleanor felt frustration rising. Eventually, the only ranches left will be his and the ones too big for him to swallow. Is that the legacy you want? That you helped a rich man become richer while your neighbors suffered? Mrs. Johnson's face hardened. Easy for you to judge. You married into a going concern. I'm trying to survive alone on land that's slowly killing me. Don't you dare act like we're in the same position. You're right, we're not. Eleanor forced herself to be honest. I have a husband and help. You have neither. But Mrs. Johnson, if you sell, you'll have money for maybe 5 years if you're careful. And then what? You'll be too old to work, too poor to buy anywhere else, dependent on charity or family who might not want you. And staying here is better? Mrs. Johnson's voice cracked. Working until I literally die like my husband did? No, staying here alone is impossible. I'm not pretending otherwise. Eleanor took a breath, committing to something she hadn't planned. But what if you didn't have to stay alone? What if there was a way for the small ranchers to work together, to share labor and resources? Tommy gave her a sharp look, but Eleanor kept her focus on Mrs. Johnson. What are you proposing? The older woman's eyes narrowed. I don't know yet, Eleanor admitted, but I know there are at least 4 small operations in this valley barely hanging on. If we pooled resources somehow, shared equipment, helped each other during busy seasons, maybe even combined herds for better trading leverage, we'd all be stronger. That's a nice dream, but dreams don't fix fences or birth calves. No, work does. Eleanor stood. I'm not asking you to decide right now. Just wait. Give me 2 weeks to talk to the others, to see if we can put together something real. If it doesn't work, Garrett's offer will probably still be there. Mrs. Johnson studied her for a long moment. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Coming out here, trying to organize something when you barely know anyone. She shook her head. All right, 2 weeks. But if I don't see real progress, real help, I'm taking Garrett's money. Fair enough. Eleanor held out her hand, and after a pause, Mrs. Johnson shook it. Outside, back on their horses, Tommy waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. You just promised something we don't have. Cade's barely keeping Iron Mesa running. How's he supposed to help other ranches? I don't know, Eleanor urged Bess forward. But I meant what I said. Alone, we all fail. Together, we might have a chance. They visited the Chen ranch next. Mrs. Chen's brother Michael ran it with his 2 sons. He was more receptive than Mrs. Johnson, but also more skeptical about practical implementation. How would they coordinate? Who would decide resource allocation? What happened if disagreements arose? Eleanor had no answers. Just the growing conviction that cooperation was the only path forward that didn't end with Garrett owning everything. By the time they returned to Iron Mesa, the sun was setting, and Eleanor's head pounded with exhaustion. She'd met 4 families, heard 4 different versions of the same desperate story. Everyone was struggling, everyone was tempted by Garrett's offers, and everyone was terrified of making the wrong choice. Cade was waiting in the yard when they rode up. How'd it go? Mixed. Eleanor dismounted stiffly. Mrs. Johnson gave us 2 weeks to prove cooperation could work. Chen wants specifics before he'll commit. The Whitmore family was openly hostile. Apparently they have history with you that I wasn't warned about. And I couldn't even get in to see the last family because Garrett's men were already there making their pitch. So we're running out of time. Cade's jaw tightened. Yes, but I think I have an idea. Eleanor walked toward the house, too tired to stand. It's risky, and you'll probably hate it. Inside, she explained what she'd been thinking during the long ride home. The small ranchers were failing individually because they couldn't compete with larger operations. They couldn't afford the equipment, the breeding stock, the labor needed to thrive. But if they pooled resources, shared tools, helped each other during critical periods like calving season or harvest, maybe even marketed their cattle collectively for better prices, they'd function as one larger operation without giving up their independence. It's called a cooperative, Eleanor finished. I read about them in a newspaper back in Chicago. Farmers were doing it in the Midwest. It might work here too. Cade was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. You're right. I hate it. Why? Because it means depending on other people. Trusting them to pull their weight, to keep their word. His voice was rough. I'm not good at trusting people, Eleanor. That's why I've kept to myself all these years. I know. Eleanor sat across from him. But we're out of options. Either we try this, or we wait for Garrett to slowly strangle us. And if it doesn't work, If people take advantage or the whole thing falls apart, then we're no worse off than we are now. Eleanor met his eyes. But Cade, what if it does work? What if we actually pull this off? He studied her face, and Eleanor saw the war happening behind his eyes. Fear fighting against desperate hope. The desire to maintain control battling the need for help. All right, he said it quietly. We try it your way. But you'll have to be the one to organize it. I'll help however I can, but people trust you more than me. This needs to be your project. Eleanor felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. She'd been at Iron Mesa barely 6 weeks. She'd come here expecting to be a kept wife, nothing more. Instead, she was now somehow responsible for organizing a cooperative to save multiple ranches from a rich man's land grab. It was absurd. It was terrifying. And it was exactly the kind of challenge that made Eleanor feel alive for the first time in years. Then I'll need help. She stood, already planning. Tommy can make introductions. Joaquin might know who has equipment we could share. And we'll need a central meeting place, somewhere neutral where everyone can gather to hash this out. The church in Red Hollow, Cade suggested reluctantly. I haven't been there since Mary's funeral, but the pastor's a decent man. He'd let us use the space. Good. I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to him, set up a meeting. Eleanor paused. Cade, this might not work. I want you to understand that. I've never organized anything like this before. I'm making it up as I go. I know. But he was looking at her with something that might have been admiration. But you're trying. That's more than anyone else has done. That night, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere outside, Jack and Pete were on watch, guarding against another attack. Inside, Cade was in his room, probably not sleeping, worrying about 100 things he couldn't control. And Eleanor was planning a meeting that could save them all or blow up spectacularly in her face. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt energized, purposeful, like maybe all those years of surviving in Chicago, of learning to stretch pennies and negotiate with landlords and make something from nothing. Maybe all of that had been preparing her for exactly this moment. Or maybe she was delusional from exhaustion and would realize her mistake when morning came. Either way, there was no backing out now. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after Eleanor's first round of visits. In that time, she'd ridden out to every small ranch within a day's distance, talking until she was hoarse, explaining the concept of a cooperative over and over to suspicious ranchers who'd been burned by promises before. Some told her outright no. Others said maybe. A few, like Mrs. Johnson and Michael Chen, agreed to come to the meeting at least, though they promised nothing beyond that. Garrett heard about it, of course. 3 days before the meeting, 2 of his men showed up at Iron Mesa with a message. Eleanor was alone when they arrived, hanging laundry in the yard while the hands worked the far pastures. She saw them coming and felt her heart rate spike, but forced herself to continue hanging sheets as if she hadn't noticed. Mrs. Mercer. The lead rider was someone Eleanor hadn't seen before, older, with cold eyes and a scar across his jaw. Got a message from Mr. Garrett. I don't want to hear it. Eleanor didn't look up from her work. You'll hear it anyway. Mr. Garrett says you're wasting your time with this cooperative nonsense, says he'll double his offers to anyone who signs this week, and he suggests that maybe you should focus on keeping your own house in order instead of meddling in other people's business. Is that a threat? Eleanor finally turned to face them. It's advice. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. Garrett always gets what he wants eventually. Always. Fighting him just makes things harder for everyone. Then I guess things are going to get harder. Eleanor picked up her empty laundry basket. You can tell Mr. Garrett that the meeting's still happening, and if he wants to stop it, he'll have to do better than sending lackeys to intimidate me. The man's expression darkened. You got a mouth on you. I'm aware. Eleanor forced herself not to back down, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Now get off my property before I get my husband and his men to remove you. They left, but not before the scarred man leaned down from his saddle and said quietly, Your husband can't protect you all the time, Mrs. Mercer. Might want to remember that. Eleanor stood in the yard long after they'd gone, her hands shaking so badly she had to set down the basket. She'd just antagonized the most powerful man in the territory, a man who'd already killed their cattle and was trying to destroy their livelihood. What had she been thinking? When Cade returned that evening and she told him what happened, his face went white with fury. He sent men here? While I was gone? His voice was dangerously quiet. He threatened you directly? He sent a message. That's all. Eleanor downplayed it, seeing how close Cade was to doing something reckless. I'm fine. Nothing happened. Nothing happened yet. Cade paced the kitchen. Eleanor, this is serious. Garrett's escalating. First the cattle, now this. He's trying to scare us into submission. Then we don't submit. Eleanor caught his arm, stopping his pacing. We hold the meeting. We organize the cooperative. We show him that we're not afraid. Even if that makes things worse? Things are already worse. She held his gaze. Cade, we're past the point of backing down. Either we fight now while we have allies, or we wait until Garrett's picked everyone off one by one and we're completely alone. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a sudden, fierce embrace. Eleanor stiffened in surprise. They'd been careful about physical contact, maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement. But then she relaxed into it, feeling the tension in his body, the barely controlled fear. I can't lose you too. Cade's voice was muffled against her hair. I can't watch another woman I care about get hurt because of this place. Eleanor's breath caught. Another woman he cared about. Not his wife. Her. You won't lose me. She said it with more confidence than she felt. I'm harder to get rid of than you think. He pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders. Promise me you'll be careful. No more facing Garrett's men alone. No more taking risks without backup. I promise. Eleanor reached up and touched his face, her palm against the rough stubble of his jaw. But Cade, you have to promise me something too. No matter what happens at this meeting, no matter how bad things get, you don't go after Garrett directly, because that's what he wants, an excuse to destroy you legally. And if he comes after you, then we handle it together. She dropped her hand. We're partners in this, remember? Partners. Cade repeated the word like he was testing its weight. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, partners. Sunday arrived too quickly. Eleanor dressed in her best clothes, the navy dress again, carefully pressed, her hair pinned as neatly as exhaustion would allow. She looked pale in the mirror, dark circles under her eyes from too many nights lying awake worrying. But her chin was up, her back straight. She looked like someone who wouldn't break easily. That would have to be enough. The church in Red Hollow was packed when they arrived. Eleanor counted at least 15 families crammed into the small space, more than she'd hoped for. Mrs. Johnson sat in the front, Michael Chen beside her with his sons. The Whitmores had come despite their hostility, sitting in back with arms crossed and faces skeptical. Others Eleanor recognized from her visits, and a few she didn't know at all. And standing in the very back, arms folded across his chest, was James Garrett. Eleanor felt Cade tense beside her. What's he doing here? Watching. Eleanor kept her voice low. Let him. Maybe he'll learn something. She walked to the front of the church, acutely aware of every eye on her. The rejected mail-order bride who'd married Cade Mercer in desperation. The city woman who thought she could tell lifelong ranchers how to run their businesses. The outsider who had no right to be here at all. But she was here anyway. Thank you all for coming. Eleanor's voice carried in the small space. I know you're busy. I know Sunday afternoon is valuable time, so I'll try to be brief. She laid out the situation as clearly as she could. Garrett's land grab, the threat to water rights, the way individual ranches were being picked off one by one because they couldn't compete with larger operations. And then she explained her proposed solution, a cooperative where they'd share resources, help each other during critical periods, and market their cattle collectively. I know this sounds idealistic, Eleanor admitted. Maybe it is, but I look around this room and I see people who are struggling alone when you could be stronger together. That doesn't make sense to me. Easy to say when you're not the one risking everything. The voice came from the back, one of the Whitmores. You've been here, what, 6 weeks? What do you know about ranching? Nothing. Eleanor said it honestly. I know nothing about ranching, but I know about survival. I know about making hard choices with no good options. And I know that sometimes the only way forward is to trust people who have as much to lose as you do. Pretty words. Mrs. Johnson stood. But I need specifics. How would this actually work? Who decides what? What happens when people disagree? Eleanor spent the next hour answering questions, working through logistics she'd been planning for weeks. They'd elect a council to make decisions. They'd create a schedule for shared equipment. They'd establish rules for contribution and benefit. It wouldn't be perfect. Nothing involving human beings ever was, but it could work if everyone committed. And what about Garrett? Michael Chen asked. He's not going to just let this happen. He'll fight back. Let him. Eleanor felt reckless saying it with Garrett himself standing 20 feet away. We're not doing anything illegal. We're just choosing to work together. If that threatens him, that tells you everything you need to know about his intentions. Bold talk. Garrett finally spoke, his voice cutting through the room. But talk's cheap, Mrs. Mercer. Let's see if you can actually deliver on these promises. Every head turned to look at him. He stood casually, completely at ease despite the hostile stares. I'm not promising anything. Eleanor met his eyes. I'm proposing we try. That's all? An experiment to see if cooperation works better than isolation. And when it fails? Garrett smiled. Because it will fail. These people can't even agree on fence repairs. You think they'll successfully run a collective operation? Maybe not. But at least they'll fail on their own terms, not yours. Eleanor felt anger rising and fought to keep her voice level. You're betting they'd rather take your money than fight for their independence. I'm betting you're wrong. Time will tell. Garrett tipped his hat mockingly. Good luck with your little experiment, Mrs. Mercer. You'll need it. He left, and the tension in the room eased slightly. But Eleanor could see doubt on faces around her. Garrett's presence had reminded everyone of exactly what they were up against: money, power, and ruthless determination. He's right about one thing. Mrs. Johnson's voice was tired. This might not work. We might be throwing away our only chance at a decent buyout. You might be. Eleanor didn't try to sugarcoat it, but at least you'll know you tried, that you didn't just roll over and let someone take what you built. The meeting ended without a clear resolution. Some people committed immediately. Others said they'd think about it. A few walked out shaking their heads, and Eleanor knew those ranches were likely lost to Garrett already. But as people filtered out, Mrs. Johnson approached Eleanor with Michael Chen beside her. We're in. Mrs. Johnson said it firmly. I'm tired of being scared. Let's try this thing. Me too. Michael nodded. My sons are willing to help. We'll start with the shared equipment idea, see how that goes. One by one, others came forward. The cooperative wouldn't include everyone, but it would include enough. Enough to make a difference. Enough to show Garrett he didn't have complete control. Enough to give them a fighting chance. Outside, Cade waited by the wagon. When Eleanor emerged, exhausted but triumphant, he took one look at her face and broke into a rare smile. You did it. We did it, Eleanor corrected. This is just the start. The hard part comes next, actually making it work. Well, Cade helped her into the wagon. If anyone can pull that off, it's you. As they rode home through the falling dusk, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd come to the Arizona Territory as a rejected bride with nowhere else to go. She'd expected to spend her life as a housekeeper in an arrangement marriage, nothing more. Instead, she was somehow at the center of a fight that could reshape the entire valley's future. It was terrifying, it was exhilarating, and for the first time since her mother died, Eleanor Mercer, felt like she mattered, like her choices could change things, like she was finally, truly alive. The Cooperative's first test came less than a week after the meeting. Michael Chen's wagon broke down during a supply run, stranding him 15 miles from home with a load of feed his cattle desperately needed. Under the old way of doing things, he would have lost the load, lost money, and his herd would have suffered. Instead, Tommy and Ezra rode out with Iron Mesa's spare wagon, transferred the feed, and had it delivered to Chen's ranch before nightfall. It was a small thing, but word spread quickly. The cooperative wasn't just talk, it was actually functioning. Eleanor threw herself into making it work. She organized a schedule for equipment sharing, who needed the plow when, who could borrow whose breeding bull, which families had extra hands during harvest. She mediated disputes when they arose, which happened more often than she'd anticipated. Mrs. Johnson wanted priority on the seed drill. The Whitmore boys claimed they'd reserved the hay wagon first. Michael Chen's sons got into a fistfight with another family's hired man over whose turn it was to use the sheep shears. Eleanor handled each conflict with patience she didn't know she possessed, listening to both sides, finding compromises that left everyone slightly unsatisfied but willing to continue. It was exhausting work on top of maintaining the household, tending the garden that was finally producing vegetables, and trying to stay alert for Garrett's next move, because they all knew the next move was coming. It arrived on a Tuesday morning when Cade was checking the north fence line with Tommy. Eleanor was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when she heard horses approaching fast. Too fast. Her heart seized as she wiped flour from her hands and moved to the window. 5 riders. Not Garrett's men. These wore badges. Sheriff Davies sat his horse in front, his face set in that expression of professional neutrality that meant trouble. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, forcing herself to appear calm. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "Mrs. Mercer." Davies touched his hat brim but didn't smile. "I need to speak with your husband. He around?" "He's working the north section. Should be back within the hour." Eleanor studied the men behind Davies. Deputies, all of them on Garrett's payroll if the rumors were true. "Can I help you with something?" "Afraid not. This is official business. We'll wait." They did wait, sitting their horses in the yard like statues while Eleanor returned to her bread and tried not to panic. Official business? That could mean anything from unpaid taxes to criminal charges. And with Garrett's influence over the sheriff, it probably meant something manufactured specifically to hurt them. Cade rode in 40 minutes later with Tommy beside him. He saw the sheriff and his expression went carefully blank. The look of a man preparing for a fight he couldn't win with fists. "Davies?" "Mercer." The sheriff dismounted, pulling a folded paper from his vest. "Got a warrant here. Water rights violation. You're accused of diverting creek flow above your allotted amount, damaging downstream properties." "That's a lie." Cade's voice was flat. "I haven't touched the creek. Garrett's land manager says different. Says you built a dam 3 weeks ago, been restricting flow ever since." Davies held out the warrant. "I'm authorized to inspect your property and cite you for violations. If the charges hold, you'll face fines and possible loss of water rights entirely." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. Loss of water rights would destroy them. Without creek access, the ranch couldn't sustain the herd. They'd be forced to sell within months. "There's no dam," Tommy spoke up. "We've been watching that creek line for weeks because of the trouble. There's nothing there." "Then you won't mind us taking a look," Davies gestured to his deputies. "Let's ride out there now. Get this settled." They had no choice. Cade shot Eleanor a look that said, "Stay here, stay safe," but she ignored it and grabbed a shawl. She wasn't sitting at home while Garrett's paid lawmen manufactured evidence against them. The ride to the North Creek boundary took 30 minutes. Eleanor's mind raced the entire way, trying to figure out Garrett's angle. If there was no dam, and there wasn't, then what was this about? Public humiliation? Establishing a legal precedent they could use later? They crested the rise above the creek and Eleanor's stomach dropped. There was a dam, crude but effective, made from rocks and branches piled across the narrowest point of the creek. It hadn't been there 2 days ago when Cade and Tommy had checked the line. Someone had built it recently, probably overnight. "Well," Davies' voice held grim satisfaction. "Looks like the report was accurate after all." "We didn't build that." Cade's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Someone's setting us up." "Uh-huh." Davies didn't sound convinced. "And I suppose someone just happened to build a dam on your property, without you noticing?" "We've had night guards posted for weeks." Tommy gestured at the structure. "But they've been focused on the herd, not the creek. Someone could have slipped past in the dark." "Convenient story." One of the deputies smirked. "Sounds like something you'd say when you got caught breaking the law." Eleanor dismounted and walked closer to the dam, studying it carefully. The rocks were local, nothing distinctive, but the branches used for support. She crouched down, examining them more closely. The cuts were clean, made with a saw, not broken by hand or naturally fallen. And the wood was pine, not the mesquite and scrub oak that grew around here. "Sheriff," she straightened, "this wood's pine. It doesn't grow anywhere near this section." "So?" Davies looked unimpressed. "So whoever built this hauled the wood from somewhere else, probably from Garrett's land. He's got that pine grove on his north section." Eleanor pointed at the cleanly sawed ends. "And look at these cuts. That's professional work. Ranch hands don't usually carry saws on night rides unless they're planning to build something." "Could have been your people," the smirking deputy suggested, planning ahead for their illegal dam. "Or it could have been Garrett's people, framing us for something we didn't do." Eleanor met Davy's eyes directly. Sheriff, you know this is wrong. You know we're being set up. Something flickered across Davies' face. Discomfort, maybe, or shame. But he recovered quickly. What I know is there's a dam on Mercer property restricting creek flow. That's a violation regardless of who built it. He pulled out a citation book. I'm issuing a fine of $300 payable within 30 days. And if I find evidence of continued violations, I'll recommend suspension of your water rights pending a territorial hearing. $300. They didn't have $300. Between the security measures, the cooperative expenses, and normal operating costs. Their finances were stretched to breaking. Cade knew it too. Eleanor saw defeat wash over his face as he realized Garrett had trapped them perfectly. Even if they tore down the dam immediately, the fine stood, and $300 might as well be $3,000. They couldn't pay either one. Tear it down. Cade's voice was hollow. Tear the whole thing down and document it. I want proof it's gone. Smart. Davies wrote out the citation. You've got 30 days, Mercer. After that, I start seizure proceedings on assets to cover the debt. The sheriff and his deputies rode off, leaving Cade, Tommy, and Eleanor standing beside the fraudulent dam. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Cade picked up a rock and hurled it into the creek with such force that water sprayed everywhere. He's going to destroy us. Cade's hands clenched into fists. Piece by piece, he's dismantling everything. Only if we let him. Eleanor's mind was already working through options. We have 30 days. That's time to figure something out. Figure out what? We don't have $300. We can barely make payroll as it is. Cade turned on her, and Eleanor saw raw fear beneath his anger. This was a mistake. The cooperative, fighting back, all of it. We should have just sold when we had the chance. You don't mean that, don't I? He gestured at the dam, at the empty landscape around them. Mary died here. My child died here. And now I'm going to lose the ranch anyway, except this time I'll lose it broke and humiliated instead of with enough money to start over somewhere else. Cade, Tommy tried to intervene, but Cade cut him off. And I dragged you into it. He looked at Eleanor, his expression tortured. You could have gone back to Chicago, could have had a real life somewhere. Instead, you're stuck here watching everything fall apart. I'm not stuck. Eleanor kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. I chose this. I chose you. And I'm not giving up just because Garrett played a dirty trick. It's not just a trick, it's reality. We can't win against him. Maybe not by ourselves. Eleanor moved closer, forcing Cade to look at her. But we're not by ourselves anymore. That's the whole point of the cooperative. We're stronger together. The cooperative can't magic $300 out of thin air. No, but maybe it can help us earn it. An idea was forming, risky and desperate. The cattle drive to Silver City is in 3 weeks. If we could get our herd there, we'd earn enough to cover the fine and then some. Silver City's 200 miles, Tommy pointed out. Through rough country, we don't have enough hands to drive our full herd that far. But the cooperative does. Eleanor turned to him. If we combined herds from multiple ranches, shared the drovers, split the profits proportionally, we could make it work. That's insane. Cade shook his head. You're talking about coordinating multiple ranches, moving hundreds of head of cattle, splitting earnings fairly. The logistics alone are complicated but possible. Eleanor felt certainty settling over her. We've already proved we can share equipment and coordinate schedules. This is just bigger, but the principle's the same. And if something goes wrong, Cade's voice was raw. If we lose cattle to rustlers or weather, if someone in the cooperative claims they didn't get their fair share, it could destroy everything we've built. If we do nothing, we lose the ranch in 30 days. Eleanor took his hands, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped out years of hard work. I'd rather go down fighting than just surrender. Cade looked at their joined hands, then at Tommy, who nodded slowly. Finally, his shoulders sagged in resignation. All right, we try it your way. But Eleanor, if this goes wrong, then we figure out Plan C. She squeezed his hands. Together. The next week was controlled chaos. Eleanor called an emergency cooperative meeting and laid out the situation bluntly. Iron Mesa faced a $300 fine they couldn't pay. Without the money, they'd lose water rights and be forced to sell. But if they organized a collective cattle drive to Silver City, They could earn enough to save the ranch and provide income for everyone involved. The response was mixed. Mrs. Johnson immediately agreed. She needed money as badly as Cade did. Michael Chen was skeptical but willing. The Whitmores flat out refused, saying it was too risky. Other families wavered, weighing potential profits against the very real dangers of a long cattle drive. In the end, 6 ranches committed. Not everyone, but enough. They'd pool 300 head of cattle, send 8 drovers, including Cade and Tommy, and split profits based on how many animals each ranch contributed. Eleanor would manage logistics from Iron Mesa, coordinating with the families left behind to handle regular ranch work while the men were gone. The planning consumed every waking hour. Eleanor drew up contracts specifying each ranch's contribution and expected return. She organized supply lists, mapped routes, arranged for replacements to handle critical work during the drive. She mediated arguments over who'd send which drovers and how to handle cattle that died or were lost en route. And through it all, she felt the weight of responsibility like a physical burden. If this failed, she'd destroyed not just Iron Mesa, but half a dozen other families who'd trusted her judgment. 3 days before the drive was set to depart, Eleanor was working in the garden at sunset when Cade found her. He stood watching her pull weeds for a moment before speaking. "The men are ready. Supplies are packed. Routes are planned." He paused. "We're really doing this." "We really are." Eleanor sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Having second thoughts?" "About 100 of them." Cade crouched beside her. "Eleanor, if something happens to me out there, nothing's going to happen. But if it does..." He grabbed her wrist gently, making her look at him. "If I don't come back, the ranch goes to you. Tommy knows that. So do the lawyers in town. Everything I have becomes yours." "Cade, stop. I need you to hear this." His voice was urgent. "You've done more for this place in 3 months than I managed in 3 years after Mary died. If something happens to me, don't sell to Garrett. Keep fighting, keep the cooperative going, make something good out of all this." Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You're coming back." "Probably." He managed a weak smile. "But I needed to say it just in case." He released her wrist and stood. "There's something else. About us." "Cade, let me finish." He turned to face her fully. "When we married, it was a business arrangement, mutual benefit, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, that changed. At least for me." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you, more than I planned to, more than I probably should, given how we started." Cade's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm saying when I come back from this drive, I'd like for this marriage to be real. Not just on paper, if you're willing." Eleanor stood slowly, her mind racing. She'd been so focused on survival, on keeping the ranch afloat, and the cooperative functioning, that she hadn't let herself think about what was happening between them. The way her day felt incomplete until Cade came in for supper. How she'd started listening for his footsteps, his voice. The flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, rare, but genuine when it happened. She'd been falling for him without realizing it. "I'm willing." The words came out barely above a whisper. "But Cade, you have to come back first. Don't you dare die out there and leave me to handle Garrett alone." He laughed. Actual laughter. Something Eleanor had heard maybe twice since they married. Then he pulled her close and kissed her. And this time it wasn't the chaste brush of lips from their wedding ceremony. This was real, desperate and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cade rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back." He said it like a vow. "I swear to you, Eleanor, I'll come back." The drovers left at dawn the next morning. Eleanor stood in the yard watching them ride north with the combined herd. 300 head of cattle representing the hopes and survival of 6 families. Cade turned in his saddle to look back at her, and Eleanor raised her hand in farewell. Then they were gone, swallowed by distance and dust, and Eleanor was left alone with Joaquin, Ezra, and the enormous weight of keeping everything running in their absence. The first week passed without incident. Eleanor maintained the schedule she'd established, checking on each cooperative ranch in rotation. Mrs. Johnson's nephew was handling things well. Michael Chen's youngest son had stepped up admirably. Even the families who hadn't joined the drive seemed to be managing. But Red Hollow's atmosphere had changed. Eleanor felt it every time she went to town for supplies, the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store, how people's eyes followed her, but no one spoke directly. Word had spread about the cattle drive, about the Cooperative's gamble. Some people admired the audacity. Others thought they were fools throwing good money after bad. And James Garrett was nowhere to be seen, which worried Eleanor more than his presence would have. On the 8th day, she found out why. Eleanor was at the Chen Ranch helping Michael's wife sort through equipment when a rider came galloping up the road, his horse lathered and heaving. It was Pete, one of their hands who'd stayed behind. "Mrs. Mercer!" He practically fell from the saddle. "It's the north section. Fire." Eleanor's blood went cold. "How bad?" "Bad. Started near the boundary line, spreading fast toward the creek." Pete was already remounting. "Joaquin's trying to contain it, but we need every hand available." Fire. In this dry heat, with wind picking up, a fire could wipe out everything: pastures, fences, buildings, the ranch itself. Eleanor turned to Michael's wife. "Can you send your sons? We need help." "They're already riding." The woman pointed toward 2 figures racing across the valley. "Go. We'll manage here." The ride back to Iron Mesa was the longest of Eleanor's life. She could smell smoke before she saw it, acrid and choking. Then she crested the rise and saw orange flames consuming the northern pasture, spreading toward the creek and the precious grass beyond. Joaquin and Ezra were there with Pete and Michael Chen's sons, beating at flames with wet sacks, trying to create a firebreak. It was hopeless. There were too few of them, and the fire was too strong. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She grabbed a sack, soaked it in the creek, and joined the line. The heat was overwhelming, stealing the air from her lungs. Smoke stung her eyes until tears streamed down her face. Her arms ached from swinging the heavy wet sack, but she kept going because stopping meant losing everything. More people arrived. Mrs. Johnson with 2 hired men, families from the Cooperative Eleanor had barely spoken to, riding in with wagons full of water barrels. Even some townspeople who'd remained neutral showed up, apparently deciding that letting a ranch burn wasn't something decent people did, regardless of politics. They fought the fire for 6 hours. 6 brutal, exhausting, terrifying hours during which Eleanor learned what desperation really meant. They managed to save the creek line, barely, but the northern pasture was destroyed. Acres of grazing land turned to blackened earth and ash. When the last flames were finally out, Eleanor collapsed beside the creek, her clothes ruined, her face streaked with soot, her hands blistered and bleeding. Around her, others were in similar condition. Joaquin had burns on his arms. One of Mrs. Johnson's men was coughing so hard he could barely breathe. "How did it start?" Eleanor's voice was hoarse from smoke. Deliberately, Joaquin spat black phlegm into the creek. "Found kerosene residue near the boundary. Someone set this." "Garrett. Can't prove it." But Joaquin's expression said he knew exactly who was responsible. Convenient, though, how it happened while most our men are gone. Eleanor wanted to scream, wanted to ride straight to Garrett's property and confront him, but exhaustion won out over rage. She could barely stand, let alone fight. Mrs. Johnson approached, her face grim. "This changes things." "I know." Eleanor forced herself upright. "We've lost grazing land right before we need it most. When the cattle come back from the drive, they'll have nowhere to feed," Mrs. Johnson finished. "And without healthy cattle, we can't make money next season. Then we find other grazing land. We rotate herds through different properties, share what pasture we have left." Eleanor's mind was already working through solutions despite the bone-deep exhaustion. The Cooperative was built for exactly this kind of crisis. "Eleanor," Mrs. Johnson's voice was softer than usual, "you need to consider the possibility that Garrett's going to keep escalating. The dam, the fine, now this fire. He's systematically destroying everything you've built. At some point, continued resistance might cost more than it's worth." "You mean we should give up?" "I mean, you should be realistic about what's survivable and what's not." The older woman touched Eleanor's shoulder briefly. "I admire what you've done, but I've seen range wars before. They end with people dead and land worthless. Sometimes surrender is the braver choice." She left before Eleanor could respond, taking her men with her. Others followed, drifting away now that the immediate crisis was over. Soon, only Joaquin and Ezra remained, sitting beside the creek looking as defeated as Eleanor felt. "She's not wrong," Ezra spoke quietly. Garrett won't stop. He'll keep coming until we're destroyed or dead. Then we'd better make sure we're neither. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. Joaquin, can we salvage any of the northern pasture? Maybe. The soil's not completely ruined, but it'll take months for grass to grow back, and we'd need to irrigate constantly. He looked at the blackened landscape. Honestly, ma'am, I don't know if it's worth the effort. Everything's worth the effort until we actually lose. Eleanor started walking toward where they'd left the horses. Come on, we have work to do. That night, alone in the house with Cade gone and the smell of smoke clinging to everything, Eleanor finally let herself break down. She sat at the kitchen table and cried, for the burned land, for the exhaustion, for the fear that maybe Mrs. Johnson was right and they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. She cried for Mary, who died trying to build a life here. For Cade, who was 200 miles away betting everything on a cattle drive that might not earn enough even if it succeeded. For herself, the rejected bride who'd somehow ended up responsible for saving an entire community from a rich man's greed. When the tears finally stopped, Eleanor washed her face, rebandaged her burned hands, and sat down with paper and pencil. If Garrett wanted a war, she'd give him one. But it would be fought smart, not just hard. She started making lists. Damage assessment, resource allocation, families who still had usable grazing land, ways to rotate herds to minimize impact, letters to write to the territorial government about suspicious fires and fraudulent water rights claims, evidence to document for when, if, they ever got a fair hearing. Dawn found her still working, plans spreading across the table like battle maps. Joaquin came in for breakfast and stopped when he saw her. You been up all night? Couldn't sleep. Eleanor gathered the papers. But I think I have a plan. It's not perfect, but it might work. Mrs. Mercer. Joaquin sat down heavily. I've worked for Cade 8 years. I was here when Mary died, watched him nearly destroy himself with grief afterward, and I've never seen him care about someone the way he cares about you. Eleanor's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're fighting for. It's not just the ranch, or the cooperative, or even survival. Joaquin met her eyes. It's him. You're fighting for the chance at happiness Cade thought died with Mary. Don't lose sight of that when things get dark. I won't, Eleanor promised. I can't. The cattle drive was supposed to take 3 weeks. It took 4. 4 agonizing weeks during which Eleanor managed the ranch, coordinated the cooperative, dealt with Garrett's continued harassment, 2 more suspicious fires, cattle going missing, fences cut repeatedly, and tried not to imagine all the ways Cade could be hurt or killed 200 miles away. She received 2 messages during that time. The first came via a passing trader who'd seen the drive near the halfway point. They were making good progress, he reported. No major losses. The second message came from a telegraph office in a town 60 miles out. Simple and brief. On schedule. Be home soon. See. Eleanor read that telegraph so many times the paper grew soft from handling. Be home soon. 2 words that kept her going through everything else. On the 28th day after the drive departed, Joaquin spotted dust on the horizon. By the time Eleanor made it outside, she could see them, tired, trail-worn drovers pushing the remnants of the herd toward home. Not 300 head, maybe 250. They'd lost cattle to the journey, which meant less profit than projected. But they'd made it back. That was what mattered. And there, riding at the head of the group, was Cade. Eleanor didn't remember running. She just suddenly found herself halfway across the yard, and then Cade was dismounting and catching her as she threw herself at him. He smelled like trail dust and sweat and horses, and Eleanor didn't care. She held on tight, feeling his solid presence, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. You came back. She set it against his chest. Told you I would. Cade's arms tightened around her. Eleanor, what happened? The northern pasture? Fire. Garrett's work, we think. It's been handled. She pulled back enough to see his face. Did you make the sale? We did. Cade looked exhausted but triumphant. Good price, too. After expenses and splitting profits with the cooperative families, Iron Mesa's share is $420. $420. Enough to pay the fine with money left over. Enough to prove the cooperative could work. Enough to survive another season. Eleanor kissed him right there in front of everyone. The returning drovers, Joaquin and Ezra, even Michael Chen's sons who whooped and hollered like it was the best entertainment they'd seen in months. When they broke apart, Cade was grinning. "Missed you too." "You have no idea." Eleanor took his hand. "Come inside. I need to update you on everything that's happened, and you need to eat something that isn't beans cooked over a campfire." "In a minute." Cade turned to address the gathered men. "Good work, all of you. Tommy will handle profit distribution tomorrow. For tonight, get some rest. You've earned it." Inside the house, Cade collapsed into a chair while Eleanor heated up stew and sliced bread. He ate like a starving man, which he probably was, and between bites told her about the drive, the river crossing that nearly drowned Pete, the stampede they'd barely contained, the mountain pass where they'd lost 15 head to a rock slide, and then, finally, the sale in Silver City. Buyers had been impressed by the quality and size of the combined herd. They'd paid top dollar and asked about future drives. The Cooperative had made a name for itself. "We did it." Cade pushed away his empty bowl. "Against all odds, we actually did it." "You did it," Eleanor corrected. "I just kept things from falling apart here." "Is that what you call fighting fires and managing a community while under constant attack?" Cade reached for her hand. "Joaquin told me everything when I rode in. Eleanor, you could have been killed." "But I wasn't, and neither were you." She squeezed his hand. "We're both still here, still fighting." "About that." Cade stood, pulling her up with him. "I've been thinking about what I said before I left, about wanting this marriage to be real." Eleanor's pulse quickened. And I still mean it, more than ever." He cupped her face gently. "You're the strongest, most stubborn, most incredible woman I've ever met. I'm not fool enough to let you slip away." "Good." Eleanor rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Cade Mercer." "Best thing that ever happened to me," he murmured against her lips. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other, while outside the sun set over Iron Mesa and the territory beyond. Tomorrow they'd pay the fine. Tomorrow they'd plan next steps for the Cooperative. Tomorrow they'd figure out how to counter Garrett's next inevitable move. But tonight, Eleanor let herself just feel the moment, the warmth of Cade's arms around her, the security of knowing she'd found something worth fighting for, the simple, profound relief of having survived another day. She'd come to the Arizona territory believing she was heading toward marriage and a new start. Instead, she'd stumbled into something far more complex, a fight for survival that had tested every assumption she'd held about herself and what she was capable of. And somewhere along the way, Eleanor Hart had stopped being the rejected mail-order bride and become Eleanor Mercer. Wife, rancher, leader, fighter. The next morning, Cade rode into Red Hollow with Eleanor beside him. They went straight to the sheriff's office where Davies sat behind his desk looking surprised to see them. "Mercer, Mrs. Mercer." He nodded warily. "What can I do for you?" "Paying my fine." Cade counted out $300 onto the desk. "You'll note I'm 3 days early." Davies stared at the money like it might bite him. "Where'd you get this?" "Cattle drive, legitimate sale, everything properly documented." Cade pushed a receipt across the desk. "We're paid up. Water rights are secure. And Sheriff, you might want to tell Garrett that his dam scheme didn't work." "I don't know what you're talking about." But Davies' face had gone red. "Sure you don't." Eleanor leaned forward. "But just so we're clear, if there are any more convenient violations that mysteriously appear on our property, we'll be documenting everything and sending it to the territorial governor, complete with evidence of who actually built that dam and where the materials came from." Davies' jaw worked. "Are you threatening a peace officer?" "I'm informing you that we're keeping records now, very detailed records." Eleanor straightened. "Just in case any questions arise later about who's breaking the law and who's being framed for it." They left before Davies could respond, stepping out into bright morning sunlight. Red Hollow looked different now. Or maybe Eleanor was different, and she was seeing the town through changed eyes. It wasn't the place that had humiliated her anymore. It was just a small town in a harsh territory, full of people trying to survive. Some of those people, like Davies, had chosen the easy path of siding with power. But others, Mrs. Johnson, Michael Chen, the families who'd fought the fire, had chosen integrity over expedience. Eleanor had found her people, and together they were building something that might actually last. "What now?" Cade asked as they walked toward the general store for supplies. Now we keep going. Eleanor took his hand, not caring who saw. We run the ranch. We strengthen the cooperative. We prepare for whatever Garrett throws at us next. And Cade? Yeah? We do it together, as actual partners, the way we should have from the start. Cade stopped walking and pulled her into an embrace right there on Red Hollow's main street, in full view of everyone. Eleanor heard whispers, gasps, the scandalized muttering of proper ladies who thought public displays were unseemly. She didn't care. Let them talk. Let them whisper about the rejected mail-order bride who'd married Cade Mercer in desperation and somehow turned it into something real. The story they told would never match the truth anyway, because the truth was messier, harder, more complicated than any gossip could capture. It was burnt hands and sleepless nights and constant fear of failure. It was fighting fires and organizing meetings and learning to trust strangers. It was slowly, painfully falling in love with a grieving widower who'd offered marriage as a business arrangement and delivered something far more precious. It was survival. Not the kind that came easily, but the kind you earned through stubbornness and courage and sheer refusal to quit. And Eleanor Mercer had learned she was very, very good at surviving. The victory of paying the fine lasted exactly 3 days before Garrett made his next move. But this time, Eleanor saw it coming. She was at the Cooperative's monthly meeting, now held at Iron Mesa since they'd outgrown the church, when word arrived. A boy from town, breathless and wide-eyed, burst through the door with news that stopped all conversation. Founders Festival, he gasped out between gulps of water. Mr. Garrett's announced he's sponsoring it this year. Biggest celebration Red Hollow's ever seen, and he's invited everyone, especially the cooperative ranches. Eleanor exchanged glances with Cade. The Founders Festival was Red Hollow's annual event, a weekend of competitions, dancing, and trading that brought together the entire territory. It was also the most public stage Garrett could have chosen. He's planning something. Mrs. Johnson spoke what everyone was thinking. No way he's suddenly playing generous host without an agenda. Probably wants to show everyone how prosperous he is while we're all struggling, Michael Chen suggested. Make people regret not selling to him. Or he wants us all in one place. Cade's voice was dark. Easy targets for humiliation, or worse. Eleanor stood, moving to the center of the room. Then we don't give him the satisfaction. We show up looking strong, unified, and successful. We prove the cooperative works. How? One of the smaller ranchers asked. We're barely holding on. Everyone knows it. Barely holding on is still holding on. Eleanor met his eyes. And we just completed a successful cattle drive that earned money for 6 families. That's not failure, that's progress. The meeting continued with discussions of festival strategy, who would attend, what they'd wear, how to present a united front. But Eleanor's mind was already spinning ahead, trying to anticipate Garrett's actual plan. A man like him didn't sponsor festivals out of generosity. He was setting a trap, and they were walking straight into it. That night, lying in Cade's arms, their marriage truly consummated now, her room abandoned for the larger bed they shared, Eleanor voiced her fears. He's going to do something public, something designed to break us in front of everyone. Probably. Cade's hand traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. Question is what, and how do we counter it? I don't know yet. Eleanor turned to face him in the darkness. But Cade, promise me something. Whatever happens at that festival, we stay calm. We don't let him provoke us into doing something rash. That's asking a lot. His voice held grim humor. Especially if he goes after you. He will go after me. I'm the easiest target. The outsider who organized the cooperative, the woman who thinks she knows better than men who've ranched all their lives. Eleanor had accepted this reality weeks ago. But I can handle insults. What I can't handle is you getting yourself killed defending my honor. That's what husbands do. Not if it plays into the enemy's hands. She kissed him softly. We're smarter than him, Cade. We've proved that already. We just need to keep proving it. The week before the festival, Eleanor made a decision that surprised everyone. She rode to Red Hollow and walked straight into the dressmaker's shop, a tiny establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who made most of the fancy clothes for wealthy families. Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her sewing, clearly shocked by Eleanor's presence. What can I do for you? I need a dress. Eleanor said it clearly, loud enough for the other customers to hear. Something suitable for the Founders Festival, the best you can make. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. Those dresses aren't cheap. I'm aware. Eleanor set money on the counter, precious funds from the cattle drive, but necessary for what she planned. I want something that shows Iron Mesa is thriving, something that makes a statement. What kind of statement? That I'm not ashamed of who I am or how I got here. Eleanor held the dressmaker's gaze. Can you do that? Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. Oh yes, I can definitely do that. Word spread quickly that Eleanor Mercer had commissioned an expensive festival dress. The gossip varied from scandalous to impressed. Some said she was putting on airs. Others whispered that maybe the Mercers weren't as desperate as everyone thought. Cade was baffled when Eleanor refused to tell him what she'd ordered. It's a dress. Why all the secrecy? Because it's not about the dress. Eleanor was planting new seedlings in the garden, which had recovered beautifully from her early efforts. It's about perception. Garrett wants everyone to see us as defeated, barely surviving. I'm going to show them something different. And a fancy dress does that? A woman who was publicly rejected and married out of desperation doesn't spend money on fancy dresses. Eleanor sat back on her heels. A woman who's confident and secure does. I'm betting that bothers Garrett more than he'll admit. Cade laughed and pulled her to her feet, dirt-covered hands and all. You know what? I think you might be the smartest person in this whole territory. Just might be? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Definitely are. He kissed her, and for a moment the festival, Garrett, and all their problems faded into insignificance. The Founders Festival arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a temperature that was hot, but not unbearable. Red Hollow had transformed overnight, with banners and streamers decorating every building. A stage had been erected in the town square, and tables groaned under food provided by Garrett's seemingly endless resources. Eleanor arrived wearing Mrs. Patterson's creation, and the effect was everything she'd hoped for. The dress was deep green silk, not ostentatious, but clearly expensive. It fit perfectly, emphasizing her figure without being improper. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore the small pearl earrings that had somehow survived her journey from Chicago. She looked like someone who belonged, someone who mattered. Cade wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. Together, they walked through the festival grounds with their heads high, greeting neighbors and accepting congratulations on their successful cattle drive. Behind them came the other Cooperative families, dressed in their best as well, presenting a united front. Garrett watched from near the stage, his expression carefully neutral. But Eleanor saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when people stopped to talk to her and Cade with genuine warmth. The morning passed with competitions, roping, shooting, horse racing. Iron Mesa's hands performed respectably, and Michael Chen's eldest son won the junior roping contest. Each small victory felt like a point scored against Garrett's assumption of their inferiority. But Eleanor knew the real confrontation was coming. Garrett hadn't spent a fortune on this festival just to watch them enjoy themselves. He was waiting for the right moment, the perfect audience to strike. It came during the afternoon social, when most of the territory had gathered in the square to eat and socialize. Garrett stepped onto the stage, his smile wide and welcoming. "Friends and neighbors," his voice carried across the crowd. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Red Hollow's founding. This territory has grown so much in recent years, and it's communities like ours that will shape its future." Polite applause. Eleanor felt tension coiling in her stomach. "Now, I know there's been some difficulty lately." Garrett's tone became sympathetic. "Economic hardships affecting many of our smaller ranchers. It pains me to see good people struggling, which is why I've continued to make generous offers to help ease their burden." "Here it comes," Cade muttered beside Eleanor. "But some have chosen a different path." Garrett's gaze swept the crowd, landing on Eleanor. "They've organized what they call a cooperative, pooling resources, trying to compete as a collective rather than accepting the natural order of business." The crowd had gone quiet. Eleanor felt dozens of eyes turning toward her. "It's an admirable effort, truly," Garrett continued. "But I think we all know it's ultimately futile. Small operations can't survive in the modern age, no matter how they organize themselves. And frankly, I worry about the person leading this effort." Eleanor's hands clenched. Here it was. Mrs. Mercer is new to our territory. She doesn't understand ranching, doesn't understand our ways, and her own history. Garrett paused meaningfully. Well, we all know how she came to be here. Rejected by one man, married to another within hours. It makes one question her judgment, doesn't it? The crowd murmured. Eleanor felt heat rising in her face, but she forced herself to remain still. In fact, I have someone here who can speak to Mrs. Mercer's character. Garrett gestured toward the edge of the crowd. Mr. Pritchard, would you join me? Eleanor's blood went cold. Samuel Pritchard pushed through the crowd, looking worse than when she'd seen him months ago, thinner, with bloodshot eyes and the sour smell of whiskey clinging to him even from a distance. Mr. Pritchard answered my advertisement for a bride. Garrett's voice was sympathetic. But when Mrs. Mercer arrived, he immediately saw through her calculated behavior. Isn't that right, Samuel? Pritchard swayed slightly on the stage. She was scheming from the start. I could tell. Desperate woman, willing to trap any man who'd have her. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Eleanor saw shock and disgust on many faces. This was Garrett's play, publicly destroying her reputation, making the Cooperative seem like the desperate plan of an untrustworthy woman. Is that true, Mrs. Mercer? Garrett's voice rang out. Did you manipulate Mr. Pritchard, and then, when that failed, trap Cade Mercer instead? Every eye was on her, the entire territory watching to see how the rejected bride would respond to being humiliated again. Eleanor felt Cade tense beside her, knew he was seconds from exploding onto that stage and giving Garrett exactly what he wanted, a violent scene that would discredit them completely. She grabbed his arm, holding tight. Then, before he could stop her, Eleanor stepped forward through the crowd. People parted for her. She walked steadily toward the stage, her green dress catching sunlight, her head high. When she reached the platform, she didn't wait for permission, just climbed the steps until she stood level with Garrett and Pritchard. You want to talk about manipulation? Eleanor's voice was clear and strong. Let's talk about it. Mr. Pritchard, you placed an advertisement seeking a wife. I responded honestly, telling you about my situation in Chicago. You sent me a photograph and multiple letters encouraging me to come. I spent every penny I had on that journey because you convinced me we had an agreement. Pritchard's face flushed. You were supposed to be. Supposed to be what? More beautiful? More refined? More grateful? Eleanor's voice hardened. I was supposed to be a human being, Mr. Pritchard, but when I arrived, you handed me a rejection letter without even speaking to me. You humiliated me publicly because I didn't match whatever fantasy you'd built in your head. That's not, Pritchard started, but Eleanor cut him off. Yes, it is. And the whole town saw it. They watched you abandon me on that platform after dragging me across the country. She turned to address the crowd directly. So when Mr. Garrett now claims I'm manipulative, I have to wonder, is it manipulation to expect people to keep their word? Is it manipulation to refuse to crawl back home in disgrace after being rejected? She shifted her focus to Garrett. You call me desperate. You're right. I was desperate. I'm not ashamed of that. I did what I had to do to survive, which was marry a man who offered me a legitimate arrangement. Not because I trapped him, but because he saw someone willing to work hard for a chance at a better life. A business arrangement. Garrett's voice dripped skepticism. How romantic. Yes, a business arrangement. Eleanor didn't flinch. The same kind of business arrangement people make all the time in this territory. Land deals, water rights, partnerships. The only difference is that ours happen to involve marriage. And you know what we've built from that arrangement? A working ranch, a successful cooperative, a community that supports each other instead of letting rich men pick them off one by one. She turned back to the crowd, and her voice rose with passion. Mr. Garrett wants you to believe I'm untrustworthy because I'm a woman who made desperate choices. But look at what those choices created. 6 ranches working together, a cattle drive that earned money for families who were starving, neighbors helping neighbors instead of selling out for quick cash. That won't last, Garrett interrupted. Your cooperative is already failing. You've had fires, thefts, constant setbacks. Because you've been sabotaging us. Eleanor whirled on him. The dam you had built on our property. The fire started with kerosene. The cattle killed to send a message. Everyone here knows you're behind it, but no one will say it out loud because they're afraid of you. The crowd had gone completely silent. Eleanor was saying what everyone thought, but no one dared voice. I have no idea what you're talking about. Garrett's tone was dangerous now. You're making serious accusations without proof. I'm making observations. Eleanor held his gaze. And I'm asking everyone here to think about what's really happening. Mr. Garrett has spent months trying to destroy us, not through legitimate competition, but through sabotage and intimidation. Why? Because we're proving that his way isn't the only way, that small ranchers can survive if they work together. She turned back to the crowd one final time. So yes, I came here as a desperate woman with no options. But I'm still here, still fighting, still building something that threatens a man powerful enough to buy a sheriff and stage a public humiliation at his own festival. If that makes me manipulative, then I guess I'm guilty as charged. Eleanor descended from the stage, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She'd just publicly called out the most powerful man in the territory. There was no taking it back now. The crowd remained silent for a heartbeat. Then Mrs. Johnson started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Michael Chen joined her. Then his sons. Then families from the Cooperative and townspeople who'd been neutral, and even some of Garrett's own ranch hands who looked uncomfortable with what their boss had tried to do. The applause built until it echoed off buildings, a wall of sound that drowned out Garrett's attempts to regain control. People were cheering now, not for him and his money and his power, but for the rejected bride who'd stood on his stage and refused to be broken. Eleanor reached Cade, who pulled her into a fierce embrace. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever done. Both, probably. Eleanor was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Cade, I just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. No. He pulled back to look at her. You just showed everyone that he's not as untouchable as he wants them to believe. That's different. Over the next hour, person after person approached Eleanor to shake her hand or offer quiet support. Some shared their own stories of Garrett's intimidation. Others thanked her for saying what they'd been too afraid to voice. A few offered help, real, tangible help, with equipment or labor or advice. The Cooperative wasn't just surviving anymore. It was becoming something larger, something that threatened the established power structure more than Eleanor had realized. Garrett left the festival early, his face dark with barely controlled rage. Pritchard stumbled after him, and Eleanor felt nothing but pity watching the drunk man follow his patron like a whipped dog. What do you think he'll do now? Mrs. Johnson appeared beside Eleanor as they watched Garrett ride away. Something worse than anything so far, Eleanor admitted. I just backed him into a corner publicly. He can't let that stand. Then we'd better be ready. The older woman's voice was grim but determined. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The retaliation came exactly 1 week later, and it was worse than Eleanor had imagined. She was in the garden when Joaquin came running from the barn, his face pale. Mrs. Mercer, you need to come see this, now. The entire northern herd, 50 head of cattle representing a third of Iron Mesa's stock, was gone. Not stolen in the traditional sense, driven off their land and onto Garrett's property, where they were now grazing behind fences guarded by armed men. He's claiming they wandered onto his land. Tommy's voice shook with fury. Says finders keepers, basically, and Sheriff Davies is backing him up. That's theft. Cade was already reaching for his rifle. Broad daylight theft with the law's blessing. It's also a trap. Eleanor grabbed his arm. That's exactly what Garrett wants, for you to go over there with guns and give him an excuse to have you arrested or shot. So what? We just let him steal our cattle? No, we outsmart him. Eleanor's mind was racing. Tommy, ride to every Cooperative ranch. Tell them what happened. Tell them we're calling an emergency meeting tonight. Mrs. Johnson, Michael Chen, everyone. What are you planning? Cade asked. I'm planning to use the one weapon Garrett can't defend against. Eleanor met his eyes. Publicity. By evening, every Cooperative member had gathered at Iron Mesa. Eleanor laid out her plan. They'd document the theft with written statements from multiple witnesses. They'd measure the fences where Garrett's men had clearly cut through to drive cattle across. They'd photograph the branded cattle now on Garrett land, brands that proved ownership. Then they'd send all of it to the territorial newspaper in Phoenix. Not to the local paper Davies could intimidate, but to journalists 200 miles away who'd love a story about a corrupt sheriff and a powerful rancher stealing from struggling families. This is a long game, Eleanor admitted. It won't get our cattle back immediately, but it'll start building a case that even Garrett can't bury. And in the meantime, one of the smaller ranchers asked, we just absorb the loss? No. In the meantime, we share herds. Any ranch with surplus cattle lends some to Iron Mesa temporarily. When this is resolved and we get our stock back, we repay with interest. Eleanor looked around the room. That's what the cooperative is for, mutual support during crisis. It took 3 days to assemble all the documentation. Eleanor wrote the letter herself, carefully detailing not just this theft, but every act of sabotage, every suspicious fire, every intimidation tactic Garrett had employed. She included names, dates, physical evidence. She made it impossible to dismiss as jealous complaints from failing ranchers. The letter went to Phoenix by special courier, paid for by pooled cooperative funds. Then they waited. While they waited, life continued. The garden produced more vegetables than Eleanor had dreamed possible. The borrowed cattle integrated with their remaining herd. Cade and Eleanor fell into a domestic rhythm that felt natural now, working together during the day, coming together at night, building the kind of partnership Eleanor had never expected to find. One evening, 2 weeks after sending the letter, Eleanor realized her monthly bleeding was late. Then another week passed, then another, and she knew with certainty that made her breathless that she was carrying Cade's child. She told him that night, lying in their bed with moonlight streaming through the window. "I'm pregnant." Cade went absolutely still. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor." He was silent for so long, Eleanor started to worry. Then she felt wetness on her shoulder and realized he was crying, quiet tears he couldn't seem to stop. "Cade, I thought—" His voice broke. "After Mary and the baby died, I thought I'd never get another chance, that I'd lost my only opportunity to be a father." Eleanor held him while he cried for the family he'd lost and the family they were creating now. Eventually his tears stopped, replaced by cautious joy and bone-deep fear. "What if something goes wrong?" he whispered. "What if I lose you too?" "You won't." Eleanor said it with more confidence than she felt. "I'm stronger than Mary was, and this time we're prepared. We'll get a doctor here early. We'll take every precaution." "I can't lose you, Eleanor. I can't." "Then don't." She kissed him softly. "Keep fighting with me. Keep building this life with me. That's how you keep me safe, by giving me something worth staying alive for." The letter to Phoenix bore fruit 3 weeks after they sent it. A journalist arrived in Red Hollow asking pointed questions about land deals and water rights. He interviewed cooperative members, examined the documentation, and took photographs of the cut fences and stolen cattle still visible on Garrett's property. The story broke in the Phoenix paper a week later. It was damning. The journalist didn't just report the theft, he connected it to a pattern of intimidation and corruption spanning years. He questioned Sheriff Davies's impartiality. He raised concerns about concentrated land ownership and the abuse of smaller ranchers. The territorial governor read it. So did legislators and judges and businessmen in Phoenix who had investments in the Arizona Territory's future. Suddenly, what had been a local dispute became a territorial scandal. Garrett tried to dismiss it as lies, but the documentation was too thorough. The photographs were too clear. And suddenly, powerful men in Phoenix were asking uncomfortable questions about how much control one man should have over water rights and local law enforcement. Within 2 months, Sheriff Davies resigned, officially to pursue other opportunities, unofficially because the governor made it clear his continued employment was untenable. A new sheriff was appointed, one without ties to Garrett. Within 3 months, a territorial judge ordered an investigation into the stolen cattle. When Garrett's men couldn't produce convincing evidence of how 50 head of branded Iron Mesa cattle had mysteriously appeared on their property, the judge ordered their immediate return. Eleanor stood beside Cade, watching their cattle being driven back home, and she felt tears of relief streaming down her face. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd actually won. But the real victory came when 2 more ranchers approached them about joining the cooperative. Then 3 more. Then 5. Families who'd been too afraid of Garrett before suddenly found their courage now that his invincibility had been shattered. The cooperative grew to include 15 ranches by winter. They'd successfully organized 2 more cattle drives, shared equipment and labor, and built a network of mutual support that was transforming the valley. And Garrett? He was still powerful, still wealthy, but he'd lost the one thing money couldn't buy, the automatic fear and submission of everyone around him. He was no longer untouchable, and that changed everything. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed through summer into fall. She worked as long as she could, only stopping when Cade and Mrs. Johnson practically forced her to rest. The garden flourished under temporary management by Michael Chen's wife. The Cooperative's third cattle drive happened without Eleanor's direct involvement, though she'd planned every detail before stepping back. The baby came in early November, delivered by a doctor Cade had brought from Phoenix, and kept on retainer at enormous expense. The labor was long and frightening and painful beyond anything Eleanor had imagined. But when they finally placed the screaming, red-faced infant in her arms, Eleanor understood why Cade had wept when she told him she was pregnant. A girl, the doctor announced. Healthy lungs, at least. Cade sat beside the bed, staring at his daughter with wonder and terror in equal measure. She's so small. She's perfect. Eleanor was exhausted but had never felt more awake. Cade, we made a person, a whole person. What should we name her? Eleanor looked down at the tiny face, at eyes trying to focus on this new, overwhelming world. She thought about Mary, who'd died trying to bring life into this harsh territory, about her own mother, who'd fought so hard to give her daughters a chance at better lives, about all the women who'd struggled and sacrificed so that others might thrive. Hope, she said finally. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents, the chance at something better. Cade leaned down and kissed Eleanor's forehead, then gently touched his daughter's tiny hand. Hope Mercer. I like that. The first year of Hope's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and hard work, and joy so profound it sometimes made Eleanor cry for no reason. The cooperative continued to grow and strengthen. They built a shared storage facility, established collective marketing agreements, even started a small school so children from member ranches could get education without traveling to Red Hollow. Eleanor managed it all while nursing a baby and recovering from childbirth, and learning that motherhood was somehow both easier and harder than she'd anticipated. Hope was healthy, strong-willed, and possessed lungs that could wake the entire ranch. But she was also curious and quick to laugh, and absolutely adored by every person at Iron Mesa. Garrett made one final attempt to destroy them, spreading rumors that the cooperative was unstable and about to collapse. But by then, the proof of their success was undeniable. The member ranches were thriving, families who'd been on the edge of starvation were comfortable, children were attending school, the valley was transforming. The rumors died quickly, and Garrett seemed to retreat into his own property, focusing on his own empire and leaving the cooperative alone. It wasn't friendship or even truce, just acknowledgement that he'd lost this particular battle. On the anniversary of Eleanor's arrival in Red Hollow, she stood on the porch of the house that had become home, holding her daughter and watching Cade work with the hands. The garden stretched green behind the house. The fences were maintained. The cattle were healthy. The ranch was prospering. Mrs. Johnson rode up, dismounting with the ease of someone 20 years younger. Eleanor, Hope. She smiled at the baby, who reached for her with chubby hands. Came by to discuss next month's meeting agenda. Come inside, I'll make tea. Eleanor shifted Hope to her other hip. How's your nephew working out? Better than I expected. He's got a head for numbers, might make a good cooperative treasurer eventually. Mrs. Johnson followed her inside. You know, when you first proposed this crazy scheme, I gave it 6 months before it fell apart. I remember. You told me I was naive. You were naive. The older woman accepted the tea. But you were also right. Turns out naive people who refuse to quit can accomplish more than experienced people who've given up. Eleanor laughed and sat down, settling Hope on her lap. I didn't have the luxury of quitting. Nowhere else to go, remember? That's not true anymore, though, is it? Mrs. Johnson's voice was gentle. You and Cade could sell now. With the ranch's reputation and the cooperative's success, you'd get top dollar. Could move somewhere easier, raise Hope in comfort. I suppose we could. Eleanor looked around the kitchen she'd scrubbed and organized at the home she'd built from nothing. But why would we? Everything worth having is right here. Mrs. Johnson nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. Just wanted to make sure you knew you had choices now, that you're not staying out of desperation anymore. No, Eleanor agreed. I'm staying because this is where I belong. After Mrs. Johnson left, Eleanor carried Hope outside and walked toward where Cade was working. He saw her coming and broke into a smile, the real, unguarded smile that still made Eleanor's heart skip. Hey, He wiped sweat from his forehead. Everything all right? Everything's perfect. Eleanor handed him their daughter, who immediately grabbed his nose and giggled. I was just thinking about the day I arrived here, how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And now? Cade bounced Hope gently, making her laugh. Now I understand something I didn't then. Eleanor moved closer, completing their small family circle. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing in disguise. Getting rejected by Pritchard felt like the end of the world. But it led me here, to you, to Hope, to all of this. Cade shifted Hope to one arm and pulled Eleanor close with the other. I'm glad you didn't get on that train. Me too. Eleanor leaned into him, breathing in the familiar smell of work and sun and home. Me too. As the sun set over Iron Mesa, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, Eleanor reflected on how strange life was. She'd come to the Arizona Territory as Eleanor Hart, a rejected mail-order bride with nothing to her name but pride and desperation. She'd been humiliated, abandoned, and forced to make choices she'd never imagined having to make. But those desperate choices had led to something remarkable. Not a perfect life. There was no such thing. The work was still hard, the territory still harsh, and Garrett still posed a threat even in retreat. There would be droughts and losses and setbacks ahead. But Eleanor had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Survival was. And more than survival, building something that mattered, with people who mattered, in a place that felt like home. She was Eleanor Mercer now. Wife, mother, rancher, organizer. A woman who'd discovered she was far stronger than she'd ever imagined. A woman who'd taken rejection and turned it into opportunity, who'd faced down powerful men and won, who'd built a community from nothing but need and stubborn determination. Standing there with her husband and daughter, looking out over the land she'd fought so hard to keep, Eleanor understood something fundamental about human nature. People were capable of extraordinary things when they had something worth fighting for. And the best things in life, love, family, community, purpose, were always worth fighting for. She'd come west believing she was heading toward a simple marriage, a quiet life, an escape from poverty. Instead, she'd stumbled into a war, a love story, and a purpose larger than herself. And she wouldn't trade a single moment of it, not even the darkest ones, because they'd all led her here. Home. Hope reached out and grabbed Eleanor's hair, yanking hard enough to hurt. Cade laughed and gently extracted the tiny fist. She's got your determination. Poor child. But Eleanor smiled. She'll need it. This territory doesn't get easier just because you're born into it. No, Cade agreed. But she'll have something we didn't. She'll grow up knowing that when things get hard, you fight smart and you fight together. That's not a bad lesson to learn. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, then Cade's lips. Not bad at all. The stars were emerging now, countless points of light in the vast desert sky. Eleanor thought about all the people who'd looked at those same stars and seen possibility instead of emptiness. The pioneers who'd built this territory, the ranchers who'd tamed it, the families who'd struggled to survive it. She was one of them now. Part of the story this land was still writing, one generation at a time. And the chapter she'd added, about cooperation over competition, about strength found in unity, about a rejected woman who refused to stay rejected, would outlast any single person. The cooperative would continue. Ranches would thrive or fail based on weather and luck and hard work, but the principle of neighbors helping neighbors would endure. That was the real victory, Eleanor realized. Not defeating Garrett, not saving the ranch, but creating something larger that could survive beyond her own life. Hope squirmed and fussed, signaling it was time for bed. Eleanor took her from Cade, cradling the warm weight against her chest. Come on, little one. Let's go inside. I'll be in soon, Cade called after them. Just want to check the fence line one more time. Eleanor paused at the door and looked back at her husband silhouetted against the darkening sky. A year ago, he'd been a grieving widower barely hanging on. Now he was a father again, a husband who smiled, a rancher with hope for the future. They'd saved each other, Eleanor realized. Not in some romantic, dramatic way, but in the quiet, daily way that real salvation happened. By choosing to fight together instead of surrender separately. By building something worth protecting. By refusing to let circumstances define them. That was the real story. Not the rejected bride or the desperate bargain, but what came after. The choice to take something broken and make it whole. The decision to build instead of just survive. Eleanor went inside, settled hope in her cradle, and sat watching her daughter sleep. This child would never know what it meant to be rejected, to be desperate, to have no choices. She'd grow up secure in the knowledge that she was wanted, valued, loved beyond measure. That alone made everything worthwhile. When Cade came in an hour later, he found Eleanor still sitting beside the cradle, her hand resting gently on Hope's chest to feel the reassuring rise and fall of breathing. "You all right?" he whispered. "I'm perfect." Eleanor looked up at him. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. How many people can say that?" Cade pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "Not enough, but we're lucky enough to be among them." Outside, the desert night settled over Iron Mesa, and inside, a family slept peacefully. The future was uncertain. It always was. But Eleanor Mercer had learned that uncertainty wasn't something to fear. It was simply space for possibility, for growth, for the unexpected transformations that made life worth living. She'd been rejected once, but she'd never been defeated, and that made all the difference.